he interjected. She shrugged. Well, shitty is being generous. But all the same, it can print basically anything, within reasonable size restraints and basic material restraints. I mean, we're not printing out plutonium rods or anything, she said, fiddling with the printer controls. I fail to see how plutonium rods would make a good costume. She ignored him. But cellulose, adhesive, pigment, easy. She fiddled with the output selection screen at the printer for another minute before finally tapping the screen. Yep, here we go. He peered over her shoulder at the screen. Prosthetic face masks? You've got to be kidding. I used to be on theatre tech crew back in high school. Believe me, these are a cinch. I say we print 2 each, that way we can exit the shuttle wearing one. The cameras will surely be watching us as we leave, and they'll eventually trace the shuttle to us. So, after we find shelter somewhere, we swap out our masks. Maybe shave your head, I'll dye my hair. You know the drill. He was about to protest. Look, she interrupted in a huff. You got a better idea? Because believe me, hanging out over the North Pole is not the answer. That's liable to get us captured very quick-like once they figure out it's us. And they won't leave anything to chance this time. It'll be shoot first, pick up the pieces later. I don't know about you, but I want to live out the week. She had a point. There was only so much they'd be able to tell just by tapping into IDF and Shovik Orion broadcasts, the unencrypted ones at least. And he just wasn't keen on getting shot at again. Maybe going incognito would give them a brief respite from the bullets. Or the shot, at least until he could find his old man. Fine, give me a facial. She smirked and clicked print on the output screen. That's what she said. He couldn't help but chuckle while he turned back to the navigation controls to bring them down to the planet. I like this girl. Chapter 29. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, San Martin. 550 Alabama Boulevard, Ciudad Libertador. The used ship dealer's showroom was just a nondescript store with ugly, inconsistent branding on the sign hanging above the front door. Even though it was regular business hours, the place looked absolutely deserted. Just a dozen knee-high holographic kiosks that projected the owner's wares up into the air. Dozens of ships, mostly smaller yachts, a few tiny cargo carriers and mineral haulers, and even a few decommissioned commercial passenger liners, all in various states of disrepair. Ground cars and public transportation pods hummed along on the street, and a few people strolled the sidewalk. It seemed to be a seedier part of town, and Proctor wondered if she shouldn't have brought more than her usual 2 Marines along with her. Stretch seemed to read her mind. "Ma'am, request permission to augment your security detail," he said, as his eyes scanned over the broken windows of an abandoned building down the street. "Fine, but I'll just be a few minutes. And if Rex isn't here, then Admiral Tigre will have to take over the investigation." "Yes, ma'am," said Stretch. He muttered something into his shoulder comset while he and the other taller Marine took positions on either side of the doors, scanning the cars, sidewalks, and windows across the street for potential threats. As soon as she opened the door, a chime sounded, and a man emerged from the back office. He was short, shorter than Stretch. A smart business suit and slickly parted hair told her this was Rex, the used ship salesman. "Good afternoon." He glanced at the bars near her left shoulder. "Admiral? I'm sorry, I don't often get IDF folks in here." "Yes, Admiral Proctor." He smiled. "I haven't forgotten the ranks at least. My brother served in IDF for 2 years back in the day. Pilot." She took a few steps forward into the showroom, studying the ships projected up into the air, wondering if the Magdalena Issachar had once been displayed above one of the kiosks. "Rex Ramanujan? Pleased to meet you, Admiral," he said, extending a hand. "How can I help you?" "I'm looking for a ship. Heard of the Magdalena Issachar?" His face went white. Interesting. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "I have. It went missing a few weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken." She took a few more steps into the showroom, glancing at a few more of the holographic ships projected up into the air. She wondered how much a used, broken-down ship went for, and how Danny had managed to come up with the money. Did you sell it to Danny? To Danny? Ah, Admiral Proctor. He nodded a few times. I understand. You're his aunt. She turned to him, surprised. He mentioned me. Of course, Danny's a good friend. So you did sell the Issachar to him? No, I didn't. But, here, come, sit down with me. Coffee? He motioned to the sitting area off to the side of the kiosks and began pouring 2 cups. You know, Danny practically worships you. She allowed herself to be led to the firm, low, commercial-grade couch, and silently groaned as her knee protested the deep bend required to sit. He's a good kid. Always dreamed of piloting his own ship, but unfortunately never had any interest in IDF. Rex nodded. Sounds like Danny. Proctor accepted the steaming cup, but frowned. It sounds like you know him more than a typical used ship salesman knows his clients. The man sat down across from her in a swiveling chair. It's true. I know him very well. You see, long before I ever helped him get his ship, I was also his pastor. Proctor did a double take. Pastor? He nodded solemnly. Danny was never religious. He wasn't. He is now. He said he'd felt a huge void in his life, and by the grace of God and his messenger, I helped him find his path. So, Danny let himself be swayed by the God folks. Interesting. Proctor had been raised by nominally Methodist parents, but went to meetings so rarely that she felt she grew up attending the Holy Church of Jazz, as her parents took her to live combos almost every Sunday evening. She'd always meant to explore that side of her life more, perhaps find God, perhaps find some deeper meaning, but she'd always been too damn busy saving Earth and shit. She only nodded and waved for him to continue. Danny started coming to my meetings about a year ago. He just moved into his apartment here in Ciudad Libertador, and seemed to be struggling making friends and finding work. He was walking by on that very sidewalk outside while I was leading a prayer meeting here, and he pressed his face up to the window, staring at the holographic ships. He waved to the slowly rotating merchant freighters and yachts hovering over the kiosks, and I motioned for him to come in. Well, he did, and sat through the whole prayer meeting, never taking his eyes off the ships. I finished the final prayer, and he said Amen, still staring at the freighter next to him. Rex started to chuckle. Sounds like he converted to the Church of the Holy Starliner, Mr. Ramanujan. He was truly taken, just smitten by the idea of flying his own someday. But he started paying attention, and we became friends. He found a lot of friends among my small flock, and he eventually came to feel called to his Lord and the Lord's messenger. I served with Tim Granger. He was my captain for 4 months. We went through hell and back together, and he did some amazing things, saving Earth and 50 billion people and humanity and all. But he was human. Human. He was no angel, no saint, and certainly no savior. He smiled rapturously. Your part in his ascension is well known to us, Admiral Proctor. You have an honored place in our theology. Theology? She let out an exasperated puff of air. Theology. How do you build a theology around someone I once saw sprawled on his couch with a blunt kitchen knife and telling me it was all over and we should just go have one-night stands because tomorrow we were going to die? He waited several moments before answering. The fact that he was able to overcome the flesh only makes his ascension that much more. He's Tim! He's not your damned savior, She broke off and brought her fist to her mouth to cut off the insult she was about to hurl. Rex looked flustered and set his cup down, still mostly full. I'm sorry, Admiral Proctor. I didn't mean to upset you. You're here to find Danny, and I want you to find him. Her eyes narrowed. How did you find out he was missing? Well, for one, you're here looking for him. You don't search for something that is not lost. And second, he hasn't come to a meeting in weeks. He never misses a Sunday, and when he does, he always drops me a quick line telling me where he is. And when he forgets, I'll send him a message, and he always responds right back, wherever he is. He picked his coffee back up. I should never have helped him get that ship. So you did sell it to him? No, I didn't. But I did connect him with the folks that did. I know most of the other ship dealers in Ciudad Libertador. And Danny, well, he was persistent. He wanted a ship, something to call his own. To get out and, well, to be free, unfettered. Damn, that did sound like Danny. Who? Rex finished his coffee and set the cup back down. As we both know, Danny was quite the idealist. He believes in causes. He wanted to think he was involved in something greater than who, she repeated, interrupting. The pastor liked to hear himself talk far too much. A company called Immigrant Metrics. But that's just a front. It's a GPC firm. I know the guy that runs it, GPC through and through. But Danny didn't care. He just wanted his own ship, and this was a cheap and easy way to get one. Sign up for the GPC, run a few missions for them in exchange for the freighter, and on the side he could take his own transport jobs and make enough to pay off the ship. He and 2 other friends went in on it together, though Danny was majority owner, I think. The other 2 were just in it for the easy money. She nodded. His story checked out, at least the part about Immigrant Metrics. Miguel's information confirmed that much. I want an introduction. He nodded. Before she could say anything, Stretch opened the door and leaned in. Ma'am, backup should be here shortly. Thank you, Corporal. But even as the words were half out of her mouth, she heard a crack. A fine red mist blew out from Stretch's forehead, and his confused face bloomed with an eruption of blood. Chapter 30. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, San Martin. Shuttle Fenway, high orbit. Civic could hardly believe how fast she managed to get the mask adhered to his face and blended into his natural skin tone with a little... Wait, is that makeup? He pulled away from the applicator in her hands. Oh, don't be a big baby, come here. He grudgingly submitted, letting her apply the disguise pigment. He refused to even think of it as makeup in his head. My dad would disown me, again, if he knew I was putting on makeup. Seriously? Stop being such a dick. She wrenched his head to the left and continued her work. So, he actually disowned you? Like literal disowning with paperwork and all that? He started to shake his head no when she grabbed him again to keep him still. No, I'm just a huge disappointment to him. When I was grounded, my fighter credentials revoked. That was like the final straw for him. We'd butted heads for years, and after Mom and my stepdad died, well, he got kind of weird after that, and his disappointing son just pushed him over the edge, I guess. Oh, sorry, she said. About your mum. I lost my uncles and grandparents during the Swarm War. I wasn't born yet, of course, but one of my aunts was pretty maimed in a factory explosion. She was working on President Avery's secret antimatter project. Basically melted her skin off. Should have died. Oh, God, he said, trying to keep still for her to finish her work. She okay now? I mean, it's 30 years on. Yeah, she's fine. Face looks like shit after 5 operations to make her look normal. Though, I suppose she looks better than if they'd left it all melty. There. Done? He reached up to touch his cheek, which now lacked all feeling as it was covered in cellulose and adhesive. She slapped his hand away. Don't touch it! Still has to dry and set. We're kind of on a time crunch here. We can't just hang out in orbit while my makeup dries. She rolled her eyes at him. Of course not. You're going to pilot us down to the commercial spaceport in Ciudad Libertador while I get my own mask on. And then find us a good place to stay while we switch masks and fiddle with our air and plan the next step. He swiveled back to the flight controls and plotted in a course to the spaceport down in the capital city. We've got an IDF transponder. They'll probably want us to divert to IDF CENTCOM's port, but I'm going to claim salvage, which isn't that far from the truth. That should at least get us on the landing platform and into customs. From there, we've got to find a way to give the authorities the slip while we can duck into a hotel and reapply our makeup. The shuttle bumped a little bit as it descended through the atmosphere. He noticed Batak tense up and reminded himself that not everyone found atmospheric flight as thrilling as he did. So, what were your plans after... After what? You know, after you do your time at Shovik Orion, I guess. Do my time? The shuttle hit a patch of turbulence and nearly knocked them out of their chairs. Well, buckle up, he said, pointing to the restraints. Sorry, I didn't mean to make it sound like a prison sentence. She shrugged. Well, you're right, it is like a prison sentence. Gotta eat somehow, you know? All social programs were cut after the war, right? That's old history. If your daddy ain't rich, if you don't feel like being a boot in IDF, and if you don't feel like rotting in a classroom at university, then this is it, honey. Hard, dirty work, no chance of promotion, hardly any benefits, long hours, space jocks like you looking down their noses at me, middle managers over-managing me, justifying their jobs by meddling in mine, and just being at the whim of administrators and bureaucrats who care more about dotting their I's on their contracts with IDF than actually, you know, taking care of its own people. He fell silent. How do you reply to that? You seem like a smart woman. Why not go into IDF? She fiddled with her face prosthetic and smeared some more adhesive underneath the forehead flap. Because I don't want to. Never was cut out for the military. Then why not go to university? Be a scientist or senior engineer or something. You've got the brains for it. She shrugged. Because I don't want to. I want to do my work, get paid for it, then go relax at home with my dogs, my brew, and my tunes. Silence as she pressed the rest of the mask firmly to her cheeks and chin. It's a wonder the GPC doesn't control half the UE by now. Huh? Just saying. I'm a natural candidate for GPC recruitment. They're for the common man and woman, the worker, the ignored and left behind. I'm right up their alley. Most of the GPC is staffed by people like me. Why aren't you? She started swiping cream onto the seams of the mask. Because you'd think that we learned our lesson 30 years ago. The swarm struck right at our weakest moment, when we were most divided. The Russian Confederation and the UE government were almost in a state of open war. In fact, it did go to open war there for a while, in the middle of the Swarm War. And the Caliphate, relations sucked with them at the time. And the Chinese, they might not have fought us, but they weren't exactly our allies. They sure sucked up our money, though, even while IDF helped defend their worlds. So this time around, I'm not going to be the one to contribute to our division. Divided we fall and all that shit. He nodded slowly. That was very philosophical of you. You sound surprised. Didn't think a mechanic had it in her? No, not at all. It's just hard to parse through your that's what she says with your lofty ideals there. Sorry, it's me, not you. Truer words, she mumbled. The atmospheric turbulence had died down, and they were now soaring down towards the capital city, coming in high over the ocean. How'd your mom die? He grit his teeth. No one had asked him that in 2 years, and he wasn't sure he was ready to start talking about it. I'd rather talk about something else. She shrugged. Okay. It looked like she was finally done with her makeup. A strange face stared back at him, a little pudgier, whiter, and older. Like what? He glanced back down at his instruments and did a double take, looking back and forth between the console and the viewport. Like that squadron of IDF fighters heading straight towards us. Chapter 31. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, San Martin. 550 Alabama Boulevard, Ciudad Libertador. Both Proctor and Rex bolted to their feet and retreated farther back into the store. The other Marine standing outside dove through the door, which was now propped open by Stretch's bloody corpse, and brought his sidearm to bear on the street as he found cover behind a kiosk. A second later, the glass windows exploded in a hail of gunfire. Rex grabbed Proctor's arm. Into the office! She let him pull her through the door of the office, even as a constant pounding of assault rifle fire ripped the showroom to shreds. Corporal, get in here! She yelled at the Marine crouched behind the kiosk. He was peering around it, squeezing off a few rounds as he found targets. Multiple hostiles incoming! He yelled, firing off 3 more shots through the broken windows. A hail of gunfire answered him. Rex yelled in her ear, Come with me! She shrugged him off. He pushed the desk to one side and ripped up the shag rug from the floor, revealing the outline of a trap door. Come! He repeated, pulling the door up by an exposed hook. More gunfire. "I'm not getting in there," she yelled, scanning the room for anything she could use as a weapon, even as she scoffed at herself for the thought. What was she going to do? Throw an Employee of the Month plaque at someone holding an assault rifle? "It's not a room, it's a tunnel. Grangerites have been persecuted for years, and I've always kept an escape route just in case." He held out a hand. His face looked terrified, but honest. "Damn it. Corporal, get in here, that's an order!" She yelled out into the showroom before grabbing Rex's hand. She let him lower her into the passage under the floor. Another barrage of gunfire rang out from the showroom, and moments later the Marine jumped down into the dark, dank space, followed by Rex himself. He pulled the door closed and locked it, then grabbing 2 iron bars on the floor, he shoved them through 2 other latches. No one was getting through that door without explosives, which she assumed their attackers had. "We can't stay here," said the Marine, panting. Blood oozed out of his shoulder. Proctor swore and reached for it. He shook her off. "Just cut my glass." "We're not staying here. Follow me, quickly." Rex shoved past them to where the tunnel's roof narrowed down to just a meter off the ground. He stooped down and started crawling. Proctor followed, groaning as her bad knee struggled to support her weight without betraying her to searing pain. If the Marine behind her felt any pain from the gash in his shoulder, he didn't say as he crawled steadily behind her. Proctor was surprised at how fast she could move when she knew there were bullets trying to find her. They crawled at a steady clip for over 2 minutes, and the gunfire seemed to fade away before ending completely. She wondered if that was just because they had crawled out of hearing range, or if the unknown assailants had finally figured out that no one was firing back, or if the police had finally arrived, though any regular police force would be overwhelmed with the firepower these people had. Those sounded like military-grade weapons. Either way, she crawled, trying to put as much distance in between them and the people with big guns. "Yeah, the passage opens up a bit," said Rex. He was standing now, and offered a hand to Proctor to help her rise as well. They were now in a dim utility access corridor, lit only by glowing LED strips along the floor, half of which were unpowered. "You know who those people are?" she asked. "No, I thought you did." She shrugged. "No, lead on. I don't want to be stuck in this hole when they catch up to us." She turned back to the Marine. "Have you gotten through yet?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. My comm set seems to be blocked. They might be interfering with the signal, whoever they are." Damn. Whoever this was, their ambush was well executed, coordinated, and had tech support. This was no street gang or even some GPC thugs. She waved them ahead. "Lead on." Rex led them along the corridor, passing several access hatches, and finally, after what must have been 3 more minutes of walking, he pointed to a nondescript hatch to the left. "This one. It's our safe house." "Our?" "The local Grangerite Synod." He tapped a specific pattern on the metal of the hatch and waited. Moments later, an answering tap came with a complicated pattern. Rex replied with yet another series of thumps, some quick, some more spaced. "Is that Morse code?" she asked. Rex raised an eyebrow. "You know it?" "A little. Learned a little as a kid when I played Fleets and Swarm." His slight squint told her he had no idea what that was. "A board game you play, and you have to send secret messages to your teammates any way you can. I learned a few things I could tap to my friends." "Did it help you win?" She smiled at the memory, in spite of the urgent danger they were still in. "Every time." Rex tapped a final code which Proctor managed to translate as Victory. She assumed was a password, since the ISS Victory figured heavily into Grangerite mythology. Her history. Either way, the hatch creaked open. "Hurry," said Rex again, offering a hand to help her through. The hatch closed with a clang and firm metallic thuds, confirming the locks fell into place, finally allowing Proctor to breathe. She had faced death any number of times at the helm of a starship, staring down a swarm carrier, or, as was often the case, 10 swarm carriers. But facing such visceral, immediate danger as a gunman aiming for your head was an entirely different feeling. A faceless, nameless, inhuman enemy wanting her dead was one thing. It was another entirely to be targeted by another human. The name, face, and actual ideologies, however warped they were, She found it terrifying. "Anything yet?" she asked the Marine, wishing now she'd remembered his name. It seemed like the least she could do for a young man who was putting his life on the line for hers. "No, ma'am. All channels still blocked." He pulled his comm device out of one of his many pockets and fiddled with the screen. "With the kind of interference we're getting, I wouldn't be surprised if they've managed to hack into our terminals, Admiral. I don't see how they could block every channel otherwise." She nodded. "Very well, keep at it." And turning to Rex, "Now what? Do you have a way out of here?" "Of course. Follow us, please." She just then noticed the kid standing next to the hatch. Tall, lanky, pimpled, maybe 15 or 16. Both Rex and the kid went down a narrow hallway leading from the small room the hatch was in, and emerged into a larger room full of boxes and crates, and past that an even larger one, complete with couches, chairs, a refrigerator and sink, bunk beds lining the walls, and in the center a small group of waiting people. At the center of that group, a face. An incredibly charming face, one that was vaguely familiar. He stood up quickly and extended a hand. "Admiral Proctor, it's an incredible honor to meet you, companion of the hero of Earth. Welcome." She accepted the hand and shook. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Curiel." The name jogged her memory. That face, she finally placed it. "Secretary General Curiel? Of the GPC?" He bowed. "The one and only. I've been expecting you for several weeks now." "Expecting me?" She glanced around the room, half expecting a dozen gunmen to spring out of the closets. What the hell was going on? "It was prophesized. When the hero made his final ascension and passed the event horizon, it was foretold that you'd be on the move again, preparing the way for his return. According to observations from the Penumbra Prime Observatory, Granger officially passed the event horizon 2 weeks ago." Curiel smiled broadly at her. "And here you are." Chapter 32. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, San Martin. Galactic People's Congress Safe House, Ciudad Libertador. Proctor tried not to grimace at the religious mumbo-jumbo mingled with tech jargon. She forced a thin smile. "So, you're a Grangerite. I had no idea the leader of the Galactic People's Congress was so... pious." Secretary General Curiel held both his hands up as if in a signal of surrender. "I agree, Admiral. This looks and sounds like lunacy. 10 years ago I would have said the same. I don't blame you for having your doubts." She smiled again, this time more genuine. "Doubts? Doesn't really quite cover it, Mr. Secretary. More like 100% absolute surety that you folks are crazier than the local Pastafarian congregation that eagerly awaits the second coming of the flying spaghetti monster. I'm sorry, but I don't have time to waste on your delusions. Please, show me out of here, preferably to a place where people aren't shooting at me, and where I can get a ride back up to my ship. You know, civilizations to save, planets to protect, the usual." She didn't mean to let so much sarcasm seep into her words, but the absurdity, the lunacy of it all threatened to make her grab her Marine's sidearm and start shooting people in the face. But, given how they currently had her at their mercy, she delayed the impulse to violence. Secretary General Curiel nodded. "Again, I don't blame you, and I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. I had hoped that we could eventually sit down and map out a course of peace." "Peace? You have your goons shoot up a store and kill my man back there, and you expect to sit down and discuss peace? What kind of deluded piece of shit are you?" He shook his head. "Those were not my men. Admiral, you may find this hard to believe, but the Galactic People's Congress is an organization devoted to peace. Yet, as with any large organization dedicated to freedom for all people, it inevitably attracts, well, all kinds. There are several factions in the GPC that are out of my control and, frankly, a little extreme. And worse, several corporations that are pulling some of the strings of a few of those extremist groups." Proctor stared him in the eye. "Mr. Secretary, I've come for my nephew. That's all I want. Just tell me who sold him his ship and why the hell it exploded over Sangre, taking 50,000 people with it." She almost didn't want to know the next part. At least not yet. And if Danny survived it? I sold him the ship. It was mine. I'm sure your people will eventually confirm that and track the registry back to a corporation under GPC control. She nodded, finally some answers. And the nuke? His face tightened. Also mine? So you confess then? To war crimes? You understand that you likely face the death penalty, life in prison at the least. He shook his head vigorously. I do not confess to war crimes. It was never our intention to actually use that device. It was only meant as political leverage. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please, don't insult me, Mr. Secretary. You don't steal a thermonuclear device and launch it at a defenseless colony and then claim it was all just an innocent mistake and that you really only meant to thump your chest a bit. Wave your dick around like one of the big boys. Curiel's eyes flashed in anger, but he managed to smile tightly. I tell you again, I did not order that launch. We meant to store the device in a secure bunker somewhere. Never to be used, period. The fact of its ownership was meant to solidify support from some of our worlds that had been wavering. They needed to know that we were taking their defense seriously. Whatever. She blew him off. Play your political games. Just tell me if it wasn't you, then who was it? He closed his mouth. It seemed she'd thrown him off guard. I don't know. Please, she scoffed again. I'm telling you I don't know. Could be the Russian Confederation, she waved a dismissing hand. Unlikely. After the Swarm War, they retreated into themselves. They don't get into galactic politics anymore. They care about their own worlds and that's it. Yes, but some of their worlds have run a large population of GPC loyalists. What, do you think they bombed Sangre and tried to make it look like you, so that the rest of the GPC worlds would be scared off from supporting you? Like a false flag operation? Sounds a little absurd. Beyond far-fetched. He shrugged. It's not like they've ever hesitated to engage in such tactics before in their history. But like I said, I don't know. That's just a hunch. But I'll allow that it might be a bad hunch. Clearly. She glared at him, then looked around the room at the others. A collection of men and women, some of whom seemed to be his aides. Others she guessed were just there for the spectacle of seeing the hero's companion. And several looked like security. Good. At least that might mean they'd be safe from whoever was aiming for her head. Admiral Proctor, when I heard you were here, I had to meet you. Not only for the faith aspect of it all, but for the very reason you have mentioned. Danny Proctor went silent shortly before the Magdalena Issachar plunged down into the atmosphere of Sangre de Cristo. I want to know why as much as you do. I suspect he was intercepted by someone. Someone who not only wanted that nuke, but someone aboard a ship with stealth technology. Stealth? Yes. Honest-to-God photon-bending stealth. I know IDF is working on it, and has a few early beta trials running. How did you know that? He smiled. I have my sources. But what I don't know is who intercepted Danny, or why, or what the motives are. For that, I need your help. She rubbed her eyes. The shock of everything that had happened over the last half hour was starting to set in, and she felt a slight shiver, and recognized the signs of her core temperature falling from the shock. How can I trust you? Tell me why I should trust you. Convince me. He swallowed. I can't. But if I was going to kill you, I'd have already done it. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw her Marine go tense. She held up a hand to steady him. I need more than that. You're telling me I should trust you because you haven't killed me? Fuck you. He stroked the stubble on his chin. He was not especially tall, but actually quite striking, with a natural charisma that Proctor was not surprised at, given his position. It would take someone of remarkable charisma to convince so many people to devote themselves to such a deluded cause. All right. I'll give you our other nukes. She tried not to shiver. Other? Nukes? How many do you have? 9. We stole 10. And with the loss of the one over Sangre, I'm starting to doubt their security and the wisdom of even having them. As a show of good faith, I'll give them to you. All of them. But what I want in exchange is, well, trust, for one. And cooperation. We need to figure out who is behind Sangre. Otherwise, both your goals and mine will go unrealized. You don't know what my goals are. I do. He stared at her, and for the first time his smile was genuine. You're the companion of the hero. Your goal is the same as mine, to save humanity. Our means are different, of course, as I suspect our definition of the word save. But I don't doubt your goal, nor should you doubt mine. He paused, pointing upward toward the ceiling as if to indicate an unseen enemy out in the deep of space. But if we don't figure out who is working against both of us, then humanity falls. She slowly nodded. It was a distraction, of course. She was in this to save her nephew and for extra credit to save Earth. Getting involved in galactic politics, she was done with that. Fine. 9 nukes for my cooperation in the investigation. Excellent, he said with a broad smile which faltered slightly. Except I should clarify. I can give you 8 nukes, now, and the 9th to come soon. Damn it, she knew there was a catch. When? He sighed. It sounded like defeat. When we can figure out who stole it. Chapter 33. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, San Martin. Shuttle Fenway. You're not actually thinking about outrunning them, are you? It was giving Civic the creeps, looking at Batak, speaking at him through the Uncanny Valley mask. He couldn't believe that they had actually thought it would be a good idea to go out in public like that. Of course I am. Hold on. The shuttle lurched, and he could see her simultaneously grab her seat and her mouth as they shot straight down into the lower atmosphere, accelerated, steepening the angle of descent to a full-on dive, before leveling out just a few hundred meters above the ocean in a gut-churning arc. Even though her face prosthetic was white, he could tell that even without it, the blood would be gone from her face. Never do that again, she managed to say through gritted teeth. The comm buzzed to life. Unidentified shuttle. You are advised to follow us to a landing site immediately or we will take you down. Damn it. Sorry. I thought we could get out from under their sensors by skirting the water. He glanced at his sensors. But look, we already lost 6 of them. There's only 1 following us now. The rest went off back to the city. Why would they— Hold on, he repeated, interrupting her question. Knowing he was about to get another stream of profanity-laden protests from her, he pushed the accelerator downward, and the distance between them and the ocean dropped to nothing. Ethan! The collision was not as rough as he would have expected, and he credited the impact mode of the inertial cancellers with half of the luck, and his last-second deceleration with the rest. Still, if it weren't for their restraints, they'd both be smeared on the front viewport. As it was, he could tell that his shoulders would not come away from this without deep bruising. They were underwater. When the maelstrom of bubbles subsided, he could just make out rods of blue sunlight shimmering down at them from the surface about a dozen meters up. What the hell are you doing? She yelled through gritted teeth. We tried to fool them your way with makeup, now we're fooling them my way. By dying? She yelled again. They're going to think that we died in the crash, yes. By the time they get a recovery ship out here, we'll be long gone. She couldn't seem to stop swearing under her breath. And in the meantime, what do we do about the whole not dying thing? Working on it. He glanced to the instrument panel. Structural integrity was holding. Ship hulls were designed to keep exactly 1 atmosphere of pressure in, not 2 atmospheres of pressure out. But the hull plates were holding, as were the seams between hull and viewport, and the feed-throughs for the sensor packages and propulsion units. Those propulsion units are never going to start up again, she said, as if reading his mind. I beg to differ. At the last second I shut them off and closed the exhaust panels. Our stabilizing thrusters are shot, of course, but main propulsion? No problemo. He held his breath, waiting for the sensors to give him the all-clear. Their reach was severely attenuated by the shielding from the salt water above them, which acted like a huge grounding plate. As if in answer, Several white streaks shot through the water right across the view out the window. A second later, the comm crackled. "Unidentified shuttle. You will surface and proceed to the coordinates I'm beaming to you, or else I'll open fire. Be advised, this time I won't miss." He hung his head into a palm. They'd lost. They were caught. There was no escaping this time. "Fine. Bastards." He initiated the main engines with a flip of a finger and released the containment panels that kept the water out. The shuttle lurched forward and shot out of the water with what must have been an amazing splash, for anyone lucky enough to have seen it, he supposed. "Unidentified shuttle. Don't get your panties in a bunch, I'm coming." A pause on the other side of the comm as the pilot of the fighter considered his words. "You will accompany me up into the atmosphere. Any deviation from our course will result in several dozen red-hot rounds coming up your ass. Got it?" "If I didn't know any better, I'd say you were propositioning me, Lieutenant." The pilot didn't sound amused. Batak glared at Civic. Her eyes said, "Don't piss off the guy with the big guns pointed at us." "Unidentified shuttle," Civic rolled his eyes. "Got it, Lieutenant, we're following you up. Any particular destination in mind?" A pause. "Just follow me." "Fine, lead the way." Much to Batak's chagrin, the loss of the stabilizing thrusters meant the ascent was far rougher than the descent through the atmosphere. But it only lasted a few minutes, as before long they were maneuvering into a gleaming new IDF starship that nevertheless looked like it had seen some intense action recently. There were several patched holes in its shining hull. They landed in the shuttle bay, they flipped off the engines, and they stood up. "Well," he started. "Masks on or off?" "Does it matter?" she asked. "Touché, let's go." They glanced out the viewport and saw a squad of Marines surrounding the shuttle, assault rifles at the ready. "Well, shit. This doesn't end well," he grumbled. "Look, stay in here while I talk to them, just in case." "In case of what?" "You know, big guns." He flashed a lopsided smile he didn't quite feel. The ramp lowered and he descended with his hands in the air. A pair of Marines sprang forward and slapped cuffs on his wrists and pushed him away from the ramp towards the exit. "There's a civilian in the shuttle. She has nothing to do with this, just an innocent bystander." "Get them in the brig. Questions can wait," said a familiar voice over the comm speaker. Civic glanced around for its source as it continued, "And get that shuttle out of the way. The Admiral will be here in a moment. I'm just on my way to go get her." Civic saw him, up in the CIC overlooking the fighter bay. "Dad?" Captain Vals's eyes widened and he stared at him for a moment before rushing out of the CIC, down the stairs, and marched straight toward him, fire in his eyes. He looked Civic over and reached out to tear the mask off. It hurt more than he thought it would. His father glared at him and cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Ethan Civic, you are under arrest." He turned to the Marines. "Get his ass in the brig." "For what?" Civic protested. Valls reared on him, Civic worried that he'd punch him like last time. "For being an utter dipshit asshole and breaking any number of IDF regulations, and possibly for murder." But I... Valls held up a hand to cut him off. "No more excuses, Ethan. Time to stop running from responsibility." He turned and marched back to the CIC. "Take them to the brig." Chapter 34. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, San Martin. Galactic People's Congress Safe House, Ciudad Libertador. "You don't know where your damn stolen nukes are?" Proctor struggled to contain her anger. She was no longer half tempted to grab her Marine's sidearm and blow Curiel's face off. She was full-on two-halves tempted. Curiel held up his hands defensively. "Just one of them. And in my defense, it's the one that was least operational of the 10. Without some serious technical skill, that thing is staying inert." He trailed off as if realizing how stupid he sounded. She raised an eyebrow at him. "Though, the bad news is it's a MIRV. 15 actual warheads on it." She swore. "I would think that if this shadowy organization you're pissing your panties about knows enough to be able to steal 2 nukes, hijack a freighter using a mysterious ship with supposed stealth technology, and is able to hack into and jam my state-of-the-art comm device," she held up her handset and shook it, "that they would have the technical know-how to be able to reassemble a bomb whose basic design and components have been around for 700 years. He gave another shrug, in a motion she'd come to call the penguin salute, both arms stiff and semi-outstretched from his sides. "I'm sorry, Admiral. I know it's hard to recognize right now, but this is bigger than any single missing nuke," she waved him off. "Please, tell me you've got the other 8 secure. Please tell me you're not a complete ignoramus." He nodded solemnly. "They're secure. My best, most trusted people are guarding them until we can offload them into your capable hands." "Well, thank God for that." She glanced around at his entourage, most of whom were shifting uncomfortably on their feet, apparently unaccustomed to seeing their boss browbeat like this. Except for the few that were obviously not there in a state capacity, but rather because they were highly ranked within the Grangerite faith, if that was the right word. Those people were watching her with near adulation. Apparently she'd met their expectations. Good. Maybe that would make them more pliable. "Are the nukes here, on San Martin?" "Yes." "Good. I'll take them off your hands within the day if I can manage it. First, I need to get to the Independence. Have the authorities responded yet? Is the street safe?" She turned to her Marine. "Have you gotten through yet?" "Making progress, ma'am. Looks like whatever they're using to hack into our system is finally running up against active countermeasures from the Independents. Our IT team must be fighting back." She turned back to Curiel. "I want everything you have on Danny. Everything on his ship, sensor data, ship logs, maintenance reports, comm traffic logs, dossiers on his shipmates. And I understand he had a girlfriend who you may know." His eyes narrowed. "Had?" "She's dead." The tightening of his jaw told her he hadn't known, and the news was distressing. "What?" she continued. "Was she a plant? She worked for Admiral Mullins at CENTCOM Bolivar. Was she one of yours, too?" He nodded. "Not exactly loyal to the GPC, or to IDF for that matter. She was complicated. That's why Danny liked her, I suppose. But she'd feed us info occasionally, and I know she'd do the same for Mullins." "So if she wasn't loyal to you or to Mullins, who was she loyal to?" He shrugged. "There's an awful lot you don't know, Mr. Secretary. For someone who's at the head of a galactic conspiracy to take down the legitimate government of United Earth. That is not what we're trying to do. We want independence and self-determination, freedom." He glowered at her. "We've had enough of your wars, dying for your nationalistic causes. You try to make us hate the Russian Confederation, the Chinese, the Caliphate, and their leaders get their people to hate us back. It's a circle of hate, Admiral. Spurred on by those in power. Those with the most to lose if it all comes crashing down and the truth exposed. And we want out. We want off the merry-go-round." Oh, please. She had no idea what else to say to such paranoid lunacy. "Oh, please. I've been saving Earth from slimy shit aliens since you were a snot-nosed, whiny kid wishing he were tall enough to play with the big boys." He was about to protest, but she cut him off before he even started. "No, I'm not getting into a political argument with you. You get me the nukes before the day is out, and you get me that data, and I'll think about cooperating with you to help track down these people aiming for my head." He glanced at his people. The aide closest to him shrugged, as if they were silently continuing a conversation. "We honestly have no idea why they're targeting you, Admiral. Whoever they are. It's clear to everyone that you're only back in the game because of the mystery ship, and that your goal is to save Earth. Again. Why these people would be opposed to that, I can't say." She wanted to say, "Well, clearly someone doesn't want me to save Earth, dumbass." But one of the other men chimed in. She assumed he was not one of the aides, but rather one of the Grangerites, from the worshipful expression on his old, wrinkled face. Short-cropped white hair thinly covered a mottled scalp. She guessed he was north of 90 years old. "It's because you're the companion of the hero, ma'am. With all due respect to both you and Secretary General Curiel, You're a symbol of far more than United Earth's dominance, or IDF's aggression against GPC sympathizer worlds. You're a symbol of humanity's ascendance, its survival, its destiny. Along with the hero, you're the symbol of hope for humanity. Someone wants to destroy that symbol, that hope. Someone wants to demoralize us, to cow us into submission and defeat. Ever since Granger's ascension 2 weeks ago, I knew something was coming to tear us all apart, to divide us. It was foretold. Foretold. She decided to play along against her better judgment. By whom? He smiled coyly. Well, by me, Toby Huntsman. I'm the patriarch of the Grangerite faith. 15 years ago I had a dream, more than a dream. When I woke up, I knew that what I had seen was not just a nightmare, but was, somehow, reality. What would come to pass after Granger's ascension if we were not vigilant? What was it? He paused, hesitated as if reluctant to say a word more. I saw death. Unthinkable destruction. On a scale far greater than the Swarm War, I saw the end of humanity. And it all started with the Ascension. I saw you return and lead the fight, and I saw you fail. His face was pained, as if he wanted to say any other words than the ones he was saying. And hearing them sent a shiver down her spine, in spite of the fact she thought he was a lunatic. I saw you marshal the defense of humanity and fail. Earth burned, San Martin burned, Britannia fell. One by one, world by world, we fell. But it wasn't set in stone. Granger appeared to me and told me it didn't have to be that way. Well, he didn't so much speak to me as he looked at me, and I understood. He gathered himself up. It was made clear to me that in the days to come after the Ascension, humanity would be put through its greatest test, and that you would either lead us to victory or a loss so utterly complete that we would cease to exist. She shrugged. What's new? Same old, same old. Nothing we didn't go through 30 years ago. But she had to know. The curiosity ate at her. And? What did old Tim say would be the determining factor? How do we get the best odds out of this shit show? He stared at her, earnestly, so earnestly. It almost took her aback. You need to remain true to Granger. Trust him. He'll deliver us again, I know it. I know it. She returned his earnest stare. Tim Granger is dead. He died 30 years ago. I swear to you that I will honor his memory and fight for the things he believed in to my last breath, but Tim is not coming back. Life just doesn't work that way. The patriarch allowed himself a small smirk. He came back once. He'll do so again. That was different, Patriarch Huntsman. He fell into a swarm singularity. It was artificial and entirely controlled by their technology. He reappeared, same old Tim, and our scientists now have a pretty good grasp of how it all happened. He did not die and come back. He went through a frickin' wormhole. Well, if it weren't for the ban on singularity research, we could probably reproduce the whole event. The Patriarch smiled warmly. Admiral Proctor, you think I'm crazy, I know. It's okay. But I don't believe in magic. I do believe in a higher power. Before I became the Patriarch, I was a bishop, a Mormon bishop. I believed in God, and I still do. But I know that God uses what tools he has, and in that case, he used swarm technology to save us. It wasn't magic, and in this case, he'll use something. Something that will send Granger back to us. Not magic, not hocus pocus, but he'll do something to send us our hero again. You'll see. You'll believe me in the end." An explosion rocked the building, and everyone cowered. A few screamed. Damn it, she'd expected the authorities to get a handle on the situation outside by now. Out of all the people cowering, glancing up nervously at the ceiling or towards the walls, she alone stood rigid, smiling down at Patriarch Huntsman and Secretary General Curiel. "The end? Well, this could be it, gentlemen." Then the far wall, lined with bunks, boxes, and supplies, exploded inward. Proctor fell behind an overturned table, shoved there by her Marine, who aimed his sidearm towards the gaping hole in the wall. Chapter 35. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, San Martin. Galactic People's Congress Safe House, Ciudad Libertador. Admiral Proctor squinted through the dusty darkness of the room and watched Rex crawl over to her and the Marine behind the table. Everyone else had sought cover, and Secretary General Curiel's security detail had taken positions on either side of the gaping hole in the wall, shooting at targets outside the building she couldn't see. Nor did she try to see. "We can get you out through the way we came," said Rex, wincing as a few rounds struck the ceiling nearby. She shook her head. "I'll take my chances with these guys," she said, indicating the soldiers leaning out of the hole. Somehow they'd produced a few military-grade assault rifles, probably from the storage crates lining the walls. At least it wasn't just her Marine with his sidearm, though which she wouldn't give for 100 IDF Marines right now. One of the soldiers fell back through the hole, cursing, bleeding from his shoulder. An aide to Curiel scrambled over and pulled him back from the wall and into the cover of another overturned table. The door burst open, and several more soldiers replaced the men who'd fallen. A hail of gunfire peppered the opening in the wall, and the GPC soldiers responded in kind. Proctor covered her ears. Oh God, this could be it. A powerful, pulsing whine managed to pierce through the tumult of the gunfire, even through her hands pressed against her ears. It grew louder and louder, until finally something blazed past the opening in the wall, and Proctor only caught a glimpse of it before it passed. It looked like an IDF fighter. Another darted past the building, and Proctor heard the unmistakable sound of high-caliber gunfire coming from the fighters. She hadn't heard that sound in decades. Usually, fighters fired their guns out in the silence of space, but these two were having a field day out in the street, making pass after pass, and eventually the assault rifles fell silent, either because they couldn't be heard over the constant rumble of the fighters' guns and engines, or because the unknown assailants wielding them were being mercilessly mowed down by shells meant to take out other fighters and capital ships. Something chirped nearby. Her Marine looked up in triumph, holding the comm device. "Finally got through, Admiral. The jamming is gone, and IT up on Independence broke through the hack." She nodded, grabbing the handset. "This is Proctor. What's the situation?" "Good to hear your voice, Shelby. Hold on." It was ballsy, and it sounded like he was in a fighter or a shuttle. She didn't know whether to thank him or berate him for putting his life at risk when he should be sending his lieutenants, not himself, a captain, into the fight. What the hell was he thinking? One of the fighters outside shot past again, firing its guns, and she heard the unmistakable sounds of exploding buildings nearby. She glanced over at Curiel. "I thought this was your safe house." He nodded angrily. "We've been compromised. More than I thought." Clearly. The gunfire had ceased completely. Ballsy's voice blared through the handset again. "I think we got the last of them. I've got half my squadron patrolling the streets for 3 blocks in either direction, and all our Marines are down here now, with another 5 units Admiral Tigre sent over. I'm sending a shuttle in to pick you up. It's going to nudge up right against that hole. My boys and I will provide cover while you jump in, just in case we missed any hostiles." "Wait, you're not only down here, but you're piloting a fighter? What's gotten into you?" He grunted. "Protecting my Admiral and my friend, Shelby. Couldn't trust the job to anyone else." "Who the hell are they, Ballsy? Who's shooting at me?" Ballsy grunted as he swung around the building. Clearly wasn't used to the G-forces of a fighter, especially one flying in a gravity well. "Still working on that. They managed to hack into our network and basically used your comm device to track you. Took Mumford forever to break through and block them. And the municipal police force is just overwhelmed. Apparently there were a dozen other disturbances around the city at the same time they ambushed you. So the city's force was stretched thin. Hold on, coming in now. Can you see it? She peered around the table and saw the shuttle descend down from the sky and hold station right next to the hole, hovering a dozen meters off the ground. She hadn't noticed until then that she was on the third floor of a building. She hadn't even remembered climbing stairs. Okay, Shelby, go. Shuttle's in position. I'm circling overhead with 4 other birds and 50 Marines are in the street below. Nothing is getting by us for the next 60 seconds. Go! She eyed the gap between the building and the open shuttle door with apprehension. It was only a few centimeters, but it was a long way down. Can't the shuttle just land and I'll go down the stairs like a normal person? Negative. The situation is still fluid. I'm getting you out of there now while we have them confused and on the run. Whoever they are. Fine. She stood up, tapping her Marine's shoulder and motioning her head towards the shuttle. He ran ahead and stood by the hole as the shuttle's engine whined from the effort of hovering against gravity. Before she stepped over the gap, she looked around the jumbled mess of a room. Where's Curiel? And the Patriarch? One of the Secretary General's Marines answered, Taking to safety, ma'am. She rolled her eyes. Such a gentleman. From behind the table she had been hiding behind, Rex was watching her. She nodded a farewell to him and an implied thank you for his help. He nodded back. Tell him I'll be in contact shortly, and that if he reneges, there will be swift hell to pay. She jumped. Chapter 36. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, San Martin. Bridge, ISS Independence. Proctor could barely contain her anger during the bumpy ascent through the atmosphere up to the Independence, and was still seething when she descended the ramp in the fighter bay. Ballsy and his fighters had preceded her by just a few minutes, and he was waiting for her when she got out. I want answers, she said, storming past him, aiming for the doors and beyond the bridge. She nearly steamrolled over a young yeoman who was bent low over a power receptacle on the deck. His floppy hair bounced as he pulled out of the way at the last second. Normally she'd stop to apologize, but she was too angry at getting almost killed to remember social niceties. Sorry, ma'am, he stammered and gave a quick salute before returning to his work. She nodded a quick acknowledgement to the young man, before continuing on towards the bridge. Answers, Ballsy, I want them! He fell into step next to her. Me too. What the hell happened? Who were you talking to ruffle so many feathers? And guns. He fell into step next to her, tossing his helmet to one of the flight crew. Curiel. Ballsy did a double take. You're kidding. She glared at him. Does this look like a face that kids? His eyes darted up to her forehead. Shelby, you're injured. Again. We're stopping by sickbay. She felt her head and the hand came away with a small spot of blood. Like hell we are, it's nothing. Bumped my head. Before I go anywhere near a doctor, I want to know who the hell that was, and I want them neutralized. How the hell can I save civilization as we know it when we've got a bunch of thugs taking pot shots at me? The elevator doors barely opened in time to keep her from bumping into them. As the lift carried them to the bridge, she filled him in on everything Rex had told her about Danny and the Magdalena Issachar, and everything she'd learned from Curiel and the Patriarch Huntsman and his Grangerite devotees. Vols puffed air incredulously. Unbelievable. I just can't fathom anyone worshipping an old fart like that, even if it is Tim. And the ambush? What did Curiel have to say about it? Those people were way too well equipped to just be some street thugs. I think Secretary General Curiel is not entirely in control of his own insurgency. The wheels are coming off the GPC, and I think he's not even in the driver's seat. The doors opened to the bridge, and she eyed Vols before stepping out. But someone is, Ballsy. Hold on, he said, reaching out to her arm before she entered the bridge. Just so you know, we picked up my son, Ethan, down on San Martin. Don't worry, it wasn't related to what happened to you, he added when he saw her reaction. But he was on a stolen shuttle from Bolivar. Was apparently on Watchdog when it blew. What you want to know? The hell is he doing here? By shuttle, that's far. No idea. Haven't had time to ask him. We're still not close. She sighed and touched her forehead to make sure the wound had stopped bleeding. Ballsy, you're going to have to let go of that. He's your damn son. I know, he grunted. He's a reckless jackass, but yes, I know. Proctor shrugged and started moving towards the open doors of the bridge. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree, I guess. She turned back to smile. Thanks for the rescue, Ballsy. Now get to the CIC and get me some answers. The bridge was in disarray, with half the teams on their feet, darting back and forth between coordinating the Marines' return from the surface, the IT team still cracking the code of the hackers, and who knew what else. Admiral on the bridge, said the Marine standing at attention. Admiral, said Commander Yarbrough, relief spreading across his face. Good to see you're safe. What's our status? She strode to her seat. She didn't know if it was still the adrenaline rushing through her veins or what, but she didn't even have a hint of a limp. No, the pain was still there. Except rather than wince from it, she was letting it fuel her anger. Raina Scott was at the ops station, coordinating auxiliary systems repair efforts. Grime and scorch marks covered her uniform, but she otherwise looked like she was finally back in her element, repairing starships after battle. Her face lit up into a wrinkled smile when she saw Proctor. Good to see you in one piece, Shelby. Engines and power plant back up to green. Patched our holes and we're ready to rumble. Proctor sat down and nodded at the chief. Thank you, Raina. She turned to Commander Yarbrough. What news from the surface? I've been in contact with Admiral Tigray and the municipal authorities. They've collected bodies from the scene, and it looks like the perpetrators are a mix. Some IDF, some GPC, some street thugs that look like they were used for cannon fodder. We're trying to track down how they hacked into our system. The fact that there were some IDF people on the ground, on their side, tells me we've probably got some IT people on their side too. All our systems could be at risk. She sat down, and her knee exploded in pain. Good. Did it piss you off, Shelby? Admiral? Began QWERTY. Transmission from CENTCOM San Martin. It's Admiral Tigray. Put him through. Tigray's worried face filled the screen. Dear God, Shelby. I'm so glad you're all right. So am I, Miguel. What can you tell me? He grunted. Not much. We're still in the middle of sifting through the rubble and apprehending folks, but I think it's pretty clear this was a fringe element of the GPC. But the coordination and level of tech here was staggering. They must have some big-name backers. I want those names, Miguel. This is all connected. Danny, the Magdalena Sakar and Sangre de Cristo, the missing nuke. He did a double take. Come again? She sighed. You need to have a little talk with Secretary General Curiel. He's got 8 more nukes of the same variety that hit Sangre, and 1 more that's missing, presumably taken by the same people taking potshots at me. Good God. God has nothing to do with it, in spite of what the Grangerites think. And if he does, he's certainly not good. Let me know when you have more, Miguel. I've got a lot going on here. He nodded. Very well. I'll get in touch with Curiel. Tigray out. She let out a deep breath. It was as if she hadn't had a chance to breathe since stepping into that used ship showroom just a few hours earlier. Who in the world would want to nuke millions of colonists? Who the hell would want it to look like Danny who'd done it? Did Danny do it on purpose? Thinking he'd ingratiate himself with someone? Or thinking that if he attacked a GPC-loyal world like Sangre, that he'd influence popular opinion and sympathy for the GPC? And help it win independence and legitimacy? Impossible. She banished the thought. Admiral. QWERTY looked up, his face pale. Receiving a wide-beam metaspace signal from the IDF station orbiting El Amin. It's the farthest planet out in the San Martin system, about 2 light hours away. The mystery ship is here. Damn it. She glanced over at Ballsy, who was huddled with Commander Mumford. Are we ready? Ballsy shrugged. We've been working on the new tactics. I guess we'll find out. Welterweight here sure thinks we're ready, though. Mumford looked like he wanted to contest the nickname, but only cleared his throat. I've been working on the, emotional projection issue, ma'am. I think I've figured it out. Well, enough to attenuate the signal. I've set up a regular EM grid across the hull, basically creating a thin metamaterial shield. Like a Faraday cage.
except this picks out the meta-space accompanied EM signal coming off the alien ship and automatically adjusts the effective molecular orbital spacing of the metamaterial shield to compensate.
Good man. How sure are you that it works? Mumford cocked his head, as if calculating risk factors in his head.
The first few minutes might be rocky, but it'll automatically learn and adjust. And I've uploaded the program into all the fighters too. Their EM field generator should be able to handle it.
So, this was it. She paused before making the decision. Are we ready? She repeated to the two men.
As ready as we'll ever be, Shelby.
Ballsy looked grim but determined. That was enough for her.
Ensign Risa, set a T-jump course to Elamine. It's time we go on offense.
Chapter 37. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System. Elamine. Bridge, ISS Independence. The T-jump made her less queasy this time, and Proctor wondered if it was just because she was acclimating to the process, or if doing such a short jump meant less spatial and temporal distortion. Either way, when they arrived, the view screen shifted from a video feed of the tranquil blue San Martin to the icy gray Elamine. The camera zoomed in, and the Golgothic ship bloomed across the screen. She felt a wave of irrational fear and consternation, which just as quickly dissipated. Commander Mumford called out from the rear of the bridge.
The metamaterial shield is working, Admiral. The other ship's EM field isn't penetrating the hull.
But now... She watched the screen, studying the alien abrupt curves of the other ship.
How are we doing on scanning that thing? Are the sensors able to penetrate it yet?
Working on it, Admiral, said Mumford. I have a few ideas on that front, just give me some time.
I'll stall for as long as we can afford it. Yarbrough had sidled up behind her. Is stalling wise? I want to know what we're shooting at before we shoot at it. He frowned. For reasons of conscience? The implication was clear. She was the reluctant annihilator of the remnants of the swarm and the mother killer of the Skiora.
For tactical reasons, Commander. Before we start firing, I want to make sure our shots count, because we might only have a few shots to begin with.
She turned to him.
Unless you prefer we start firing blindly and willy-nilly, just take our chances and hope for the best.
He backed off.
Of course, Admiral. I'll prep the emergency crews for damage response.
Good. They spent a tense half-hour watching the ship, which slowly orbited the tiny gray planet. Each time they passed the IDF station, it reflected the weak light of San Martin's sun back at them, which at this distance only looked like a very bright star.
So, it's ignoring the orbital station this time, and us.
She tapped her armbrests impatiently.
Tell me about Elamine. What's down there?
Lieutenant Whitehorse worked her console and brought up the data.
Basically, just a giant ball of water ice and rock. Molten iron-nickel core, about the size of Pluto, if that helps. There is a small research station down on the surface.
IDF?
No, ma'am. A research outpost run by one of the private universities on San Martin.
Population?
A few hundred.
She went through the grim moral calculus involved with balancing the needs of a few hundred civilians on the ground, the few dozen IDF officers on the station, and the crew of the Independence, along with the billions who were depending on her in this moment. It was ghoulish to think about, but those unfortunate people down on the planet were not the highest priority. QWERTY looked up from the comm station.
They're asking for assistance, Admiral, and they're suffering the full effect of the Golgothic broadcast, so they're a little agitated.
Tell them we're occupied, but that they should evacuate immediately.
Lieutenant Whitehorse shouted.
Alien ship is firing!
On the screen, they all watched as the same purple-white beam lanced out from the strange ship, not towards the Independence, but down at the icy planet below.
Are they hitting the research station?
Whitehorse shook her head.
No, ma'am. It's just drilling into the surface like it did at Ido.
Yarbrough stiffened.
Are we going to respond? It's still a direct attack on a UE world with UE civilians on it. Those people are in immediate danger.
I agree. They're in immediate danger, said Proctor. But I want to be sure of what we're doing before we rush in with all guns firing.
She held up a hand as he started to interrupt her. "There are bigger stakes here than a research station, Commander. If we get this wrong, billions die instead of hundreds." His expression was cold. "Small comfort for the families of those students and researchers down there." She turned back to the screen. "I didn't say we were doing nothing. Ballsy, you there?" She tapped on the comm. Moments later, from the comm speaker, "Shelby? I want an evacuation of Elamine, now. Every available shuttle, even the fighters. We can fit up to 3 people in those if they get cozy. And hurry." "Aye, Admiral," he said, and started barking orders at his staff in the background. "And Tyler," she added, using his given name caught his attention like she wanted. "Shelby?" "I mean all shuttles. And all pilots. Got it?" A long pause.
"Understood."
She turned back to Lieutenant Whitehorse. "Progress of the beam. It's drilled about 10% into Elamine's crust. We'll hit the mantle soon." Commander Mumford called from the science station.
"Ma'am, Elamine is fundamentally different than Ido. Ido was essentially a giant rock, never even attained hydrostatic equilibrium or planetary differentiation. You know, its core was essentially the same as its outer regions with no mantle." Proctor's sighed. "Commander, I am a scientist. No need for the science lesson. Please, get to the point." Yes, ma'am. So Elamine is different. There's a crust, a mantle, a core, like a regular old planet. And with that beam drilling into it..."
She filled in the blanks. "Okay, so we're looking at a magma eruption." She glanced at the sensor readout on her command console. The science station's data stream scrolled down, and she only caught snippets of the readings. "What's the pressure? How much magma? How far will it blast out? And more importantly, what's the risk to the research station?"
Mumford shook his head.
"This is a PhD dissertation here, ma'am. We could study the geodynamics problem for years, but best guess we're looking at a large eruption. Soon."
He looked up, his face somber.
"The drilling site is only 100 kilometers from the research station. Even a minor eruption, given the lack of atmosphere and low gravity, is going to wreak havoc on the station. Possibly completely destroy it."
She nodded.
"Proctor to Captain Vols."
"Yeah, Admiral."
"Vols, you know how I said, hurry?"
"Yeah, Admiral."
She watched the seismic readings on her science data feed begin to stir, immediately reaching up to the top of the scale.
"What I meant was, hurry the hell up!"
Chapter 38. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, Elamine. Brig, ISS Independence. The door to his cell slid open, and there he was. "Oh, God, just turn me over to CENTCOM already." Civic forced a smile. "So soon? I wasn't expecting you for another, 10 years like last time." Vols glanced at him icily. "Shut up and listen. We're engaging the alien ship again." He hesitated. "The Admiral ordered that every available pilot assist in the effort." Civic did a double take. "You want me to fly a fighter out there against that thing?"
"Don't be silly. I wouldn't let you near a fighter if my life depended on it."
Vols's scowl deepened. "There's a research station down there on Elamine, just a few hundred people. You're going to take the shuttle you came in on, get in, grab people, and get out. Simple. Can you handle that?" Civic shrugged. He desperately wanted to reach down into his boot for his metal flask, but remembered it was long since empty. "Sounds easy enough." His father cocked his head at him, his eyes still hard as ice. "Without getting anyone killed. Nothing fancy, just in and out." Civic glared back. How dare he? He bit off a curse and forced a painfully thin smile. Of course. It looked like Vols was expecting more verbal fireworks than that and almost looked disappointed. But after a brief, awkward moment, he held out an arm indicating the door. They walked quickly, in silence, the 2 decks it took to get to the fighter bay. The shuttle he'd arrived in was sitting off to the side, its ramp descended, just waiting for a pilot. At the top, he stopped and turned to look at his father. "Remember, in and out, nothing fancy, nothing heroic. You're there to save as many students as you can." "Got it." He turned back towards the cockpit.
"And Ethan,"
Vols added, making Civic pause at the hatch.
That EM field that brings out the crazies in people is active. We figured out how to shield the Independents from it, and we've modified the shuttle. But the people down there are going to be agitated, and you will be too. Be careful.
Be careful? He tried to smile again. Thanks for the concern. I'll be fine. The hatch closed and he flipped the engines on before he could even sit down. 10 seconds later, he was soaring out of the fighter bay, still half dazed at the sudden turn of events. He'd spent the past hour in his cell wondering if his father had suddenly turned revolutionary, leading the GPC cause at the helm of a new warship. But his mentioning of the Admiral, there was only one Admiral to his father, told Civic that maybe he'd gotten lucky after all. There was no way in hell that Shelby Proctor was at the head of a multi-organizational galactic conspiracy. The giant gray orb of Elamine filled his viewport, and given how small the planet actually was, the visual told him they must be pretty damn close to it. In the distance, maybe 100 kilometers away, he could just make out the dot of the mystery ship and the shimmering purple-white beam that was boring into the surface. He aimed the shuttle down at the research station just a handful of kilometers away from the impact zone and punched the accelerator. "Here goes nothing," he breathed. The craft shot forward and the planet started growing even larger in the viewport, filling the entire area. Down below, several dozen kilometers away, he gulped as he saw bright red magma leap up out of the widening hole being dug by the alien's beam, and he knew that time was not on his side. "Is that thing going to blow anytime soon?" he asked. The comm cracked. "Yes," came his father's reply. "Okay." He pushed down on the accelerator, maxing it out. Any advice?" "Hurry," was all his father said. The comm fell silent. "Got it," he replied to no one. "Okay, no atmosphere, so no brakes. Time to reverse thrust in." He glanced at the surface rangefinder. 3, 2, 1. He cut off the main thrusters and switched to the forward thrusters. The inertial cancellers took a moment to adjust, making his stomach churn a bit as the G-forces thrust him forward against the restraints, far more than the collision into San Martin's Ocean had just an hour earlier. Oh, good thing Sarah isn't here. The research station loomed ahead. A small armada of fighters and shuttles from the Independents was in the process of either landing or taking off from the station's lone shuttle bay. The protective energy field holding in the air pressure shimmering each time a ship passed through. In the distance, kilometers away, the purple-white beam illuminated the entire landscape, casting long alien shadows over the ice rocks and craggy peaks that rippled away into the distance. He passed through the field and found an unoccupied spot to land on the deck. As soon as the engines were idling, he popped the hatch and started dashing down the still descending ramp, and was immediately assaulted by a wave of fear, excitement, anger, rage, sadness, all at once. Just like he'd felt back on Watchdog. "Oh shit," he thought. "This is going to get intense." Barely able to suppress his mix of anger and fear, he ran towards the doors at the end of the bay. Where was the anger coming from? His father, of course. The fear? Obvious he was about to die. The sadness? Who the hell knew? All he knew he focused on, all he could force himself to think about was rescue. Find the students, find as many as I can and cram them into the shuttle and get the hell out. He rushed into the hallway, where another fighter pilot was ushering a group of frightened-looking college students back towards the bay. The other pilot, obviously trying to suppress his own mix of fear and emotion, waved towards a door at the end of the corridor. "They've all assembled in the mess, just a few left. Grayson should be able to fit most of them in his shuttle, but the rest will need to go in yours." "Got it," he said in a rush and ran down the hallway. In the mess hall, the pilot he assumed was Grayson was arguing with one of the women he assumed was a professor or a senior researcher. Everyone, the dozen or so students, the researcher, Grayson, looked terrified. The alien's field was taking its toll on all of them. "What's the problem?" he yelled. The researcher pointed at another door in the mess hall. "There's more. They've barricaded themselves in a lab. I can't convince them to leave. It's... She balled her fists and actually shrieked. This was getting out of control, he thought.
Should I smack her? He batted the irrational thought aside and pointed at the exit, yelling at Grayson. Get them all in your shuttle. I'll handle the stubborn ones. You sure? Yeah, go! He grabbed one of the students sitting on a cafeteria bench, fidgeting uncontrollably with his hands, and shoved him towards the door. Go! All of you, go! Luckily, they all ran for the door, and he didn't have to resort to violence. Unfortunately. He was kind of hoping for an outlet. Maybe as a consolation he could have a little... He reached down to his boot and caught himself halfway when he realized, again, that it was empty. Damn it! He ran towards the door the researcher had indicated and nearly fell over as the entire room shifted, sloping down to his right. Holy shit, he mumbled. The walls and floor were shaking violently, and all the tables slid down towards the far wall to his right as he stumbled towards the door. He wrenched it open. Luckily, it didn't jam with the shifting orientation of the entire building, and ran down the hallway lined with laboratories, struggling to keep his footing against the rightward slope, as well as the glass that was falling out of the laboratory's windows, which was a blessing and a curse, he supposed, as looking through all the shattering windows let him know that none of the labs were occupied. Except for the door at the very end of the hall. It was shut, and through the tiny, still unbroken window next to it, he could see a fear-filled face looking out. Using the leaning wall as leverage to occasionally redirect his course, he launched himself down the hallway and pushed on the door's handle. It didn't budge. Oh, hell no! Supporting himself on the slanting wall, he kicked the door. The dull thud of his boot told him the door was not exactly made to be kicked in. In fact, it probably served as an emergency airlock by the looks of it. The wide eyes staring out the tiny window watched him in terror. Civic cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled into the glass, "We've got to get out of here! This place is going to blow!" Wide eyes retreated from the window further into the lab, and Civic peered in. 3 other students huddled in the corner, while a 4th lay sprawled out near the other corner. A pool of blood surrounded his head. "Oh, shit," he said. The building started to tremble again as another earthquake struck. His comm device crackled from his pocket. "Ethan, you're out of time," said his father. "The alien's hole is full on erupting now. Magma is jetting out into the sky like a fountain. You've got 1 billion tons of a hot lava rain incoming within minutes." Double shit. He peered back into the room. Okay. New plan, Ethan. One of the pair of students in the corner had thick glasses, and his eyes were flitting back and forth nervously. His mouth moved, as if he was mumbling under his breath, though for all Civic knew the kid could be shouting since he could hardly hear a thing through that window. The other kid in the corner only held his head in his hands, sobbing, while wide eyes paced back and forth. An idea struck him. "Ethan, you're a horrible, horrible man." He pounded on the window and wide eyes looked up, his eyes somehow getting even wider. Civic pointed to the corner. "Hey! That one! 4 Eyes! He's a fucking alien! He's gonna fucking kill you both!" Part of him, the juvenile evil half, wanted to laugh out loud as Wide Eyes and Crybaby both snapped their heads to look at 4 Eyes. And before he could even smile, the pair of them bolted towards the door. Civic was waiting for them. He reached down and picked up a piece of railing that had fallen onto the floor and brandished it behind his back, just in case. The door opened, and Wide Eyes burst out, followed by Crybaby. He concentrated, trying to keep all snark, all anger, all fear out of his voice. Anything more could set them off. The whole situation could go downhill very fast. He thought of the sloped floor beneath him. Well, further downhill. "I'm an IDF pilot. I'm here to rescue you. Go to the bay and wait right next to the shuttle. Move." They both blinked wildly. Wide Eyes dashed off, making Civic relax his arm a little. Looked like he wouldn't be needing the piece of railing he was holding. But Crybaby just retreated to the corner in the hallway by the door and whimpered. Civic dropped the railing, grit his teeth against the raging emotions jumbling his thoughts, and took a step forward. He reached out and touched the kid's shoulder. Couldn't be more than 18. "Hey, what's your name?" "My name's Ethan." The whimpering paused. Nicky Epstein?" "Listen, Nicky, He squeezed the kid's shoulder. This one needed a softer touch than Wide Eyes, apparently. Good God, where the hell was that flask? We've got to go. Time to run. Can you run? He nodded quickly. Good. He smiled and squeezed again. Then run. He pointed down the hallway. Run! The kid swallowed visibly and ran. One more. The building rocked as if something had slammed into it. Shit! He dashed into the room and knelt down to check on the kid lying in his blood. The building shook again. He reached for the neck, feeling for a pulse. Nothing. His comm cracked again. Ethan, now! Four Eyes was still sitting in the corner, crying now. He ran up the slope of the floor, grabbed the kid by the wrist, and started pulling. Luckily, the kid let himself be led through the door and even managed to keep up through the hallway and into the cafeteria. But as he tried running past one of the cafeteria tables, the kid tripped on debris, slipped, and hit his head on the bench on the way down. Knocked out, cold. The building shook again as something else hit it. Damn it! He yelled, and bent over to lift the kid up. Four Eyes was rail-thin and light as a 10-year-old, despite the post-pubescent stubble on his chin. Civic, adrenaline-fueled, lifted the kid over his shoulders and resumed his sprint towards the bay. A voice blared out from his pocket. Ethan, if you're pretending to be a hero when you should be getting people out, I'm going to... Civic slapped his pocket and the comm flipped off. He ran towards the bay where, in the space beyond the shimmering force field holding in the atmosphere, he saw the unmistakable sight of giant balls of lava crashing down on the landscape all around them. Well, kid, this is going to be a close one, he murmured. And he ran. Chapter 39. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, El Amin. Bridge, ISS Independence. Admiral Proctor nervously tapped her armrest. The Golgothic's purple-white beam continued drilling down into El Amin's crust, and magma was spewing out into the skies of the tiny planet. Hundreds of kilometers out in all directions, splashing down in great red globs all across the surface. Where they struck, ice explosively sublimed and steamed out into the non-existent atmosphere, like great, roiling white oceans that dissipated as they boiled off into the vacuum. Any word from him? The comm speaker nearby answered. Haven't heard from him in a few minutes, said Vols. He sounded pissed. The magma eruption intensified. Vast showers of lava rained down, with several large globes slamming into one of the wings of the research station. Proctor stared at the screen. Something moved against the backdrop of the station and the rain of fire. Fast. Is that him? Lieutenant Whitehorse nodded. Yeah, it's the shuttle. Zoom in. She breathed a little easier. But not for long. The screen zoomed into the shuttle as it streaked away from the station, just as a giant globe of lava crashed into the landing pad of the shuttle bay. The entire station exploded. With gut-churning weaves and barrel rolls, the shuttle dodged another hail of falling lava, with maneuvers that Proctor was sure would have resulted in the contents of her stomach being smeared all over the shuttle's window, had she been aboard. That's... began Ensign Risa at the helm. That's... incredible. I've never seen anyone fly like that. Proctor nodded in agreement. It was true. Out of any fighter pilot she'd ever met, Ballsy's kid outshone them all. Even Ballsy. She supposed that was half of why he hated the kid, in spite of what Ballsy claimed. But the fiery hell he was flying through was worse than any fighter battle with the swarm she'd ever seen. Thousands of globules were falling down through the black sky all around the shuttle. And yet it still weaved, looped, darted, rolled, and banked its way through. She found herself gripping the armrest so tight that her knuckles turned white. No! Lieutenant Whitehorse yelled from behind her. Proctor stared in horror. One of the globs of lava had struck the shuttle. Red-hot streams of the stuff fell away as the shuttle accelerated upwards, and Proctor realized what he was doing. Since there was no atmosphere to blast the lava off the shuttle, he had to rely on the shuttle's acceleration to shed the boiling rock. Another glob struck the shuttle, another, and it was free. Clear of the maelstrom of lava rain, it accelerated even faster, and the rest of the lava coating the ravaged surface of the shuttle streamed away as it made a beeline for the Independence. Proctor breathed a sigh of relief. She tapped her comm on.
Lieutenant Civic, this is Admiral Proctor. Well done, Ethan. You guys okay in there?
Yeah, came the hesitant reply. I guess.
You guess?
Well, just covered in the vomit from 3 other people, each of whom have also soiled themselves. We might have to just hose out the entire shuttle. Proctor smirked at that.
Well, if that's the worst that happened, we can thank our lucky stars.
A pause. I did lose someone.
Couldn't carry 2 people at once. I left the injured one. At least I think he was injured, but he might have been dead. I guess I could have tried to carry both. It's not your fault, Ethan, she said. You saved 3 lives. If it weren't for you, they'd be dead. Remember that. We can't save everyone. But end of conversation. Report to the fighter bay and for reassignment to the fighter squadron.
Civic protested.
But, ma'am, I don't think I'm ready for that. Bullshit. After that fancy flying? No, you've got your wings back. I don't care what your father says. Proctor out.
She glanced at the timer on her console, then back up at the screen where the alien mystery ship was still drilling into the planet. Plenty of time, she thought, and turned back at Whitehorse.
You think he can handle it?
Whitehorse shrugged.
Honestly? Don't know, ma'am. You 2 were pretty serious for a while, from what Ballsy tells me. No one here knows him better than you, even Ballsy. Parents' perceptions of their kids can get colored over time. Parents and aunts, she thought, her mind drifting momentarily to the news about Danny that Curiel and Rex had given her. He's good, Whitehorse said, reaching back to retie her hair into a tight regulation bun. The best. But his mental state, ever since his mom and stepdad? She shook her head. That changed him. Almost killed him. It was soon after that when I ended it between us. I just couldn't handle it anymore. There are some things you just don't come back from, accident or no.
Proctor nodded. It reminded her of her little speech to Curiel about Granger. There are some things you just don't come back from.
Black holes chief among them, she thought wryly.
He'll get over it.
He has to. And the way I figure it, he just saved 3 kids. That evens the score.
Proctor glanced at the timer again.
With all due respect, ma'am, I don't think it works that way,
said Whitehorse somberly. She was right, of course. But she'd made her own share of mistakes. Innocent, honest mistakes made in the heat of battle, the spur of the moment, that led to deaths. Some of those mistakes led to untold numbers of deaths. But in the rush to save humanity, what the hell else could she have done?
No, it doesn't. But whether redemption or a lighter conscience comes or not, we need him.
She glanced at the ship again, still drilling away.
And given current events, we're going to need thousands more like him.
The timer approached 0 and she finally turned to Commander Mumford.
Status?
He nodded.
The progress of the drilling is proceeding just like at Ido, identical to a T.
You ready with the scans? As soon as we start this thing, I want to be ready. I want to know everything about that ship, and we don't get a second shot at this.
Yes, ma'am, we're ready.
She tapped the comm on.
Ballsy, your boys ready?
A few seconds later, he answered, Yeah, last of them just offloaded the passengers. We're ready to launch. Commander Yarbrough looked up from his XO's station and nodded once.
All systems reporting ready, Admiral.
She gripped her armrests.
Good. All hands. Prepare for Operation Proctor 1. A deep breath. Here goes nothing. Now!
Chapter 40. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, Elamine. Bridge, ISS Independence. Commander Yarbrough nodded his acknowledgement.
Launch fighters. Ensign Risa, move the Independence to flank the Golgothics at Z plus 5 kilometers. All mag-rail crews prepare to fire. Laser crews, stand by. Aye, aye, sir, said Risa at the helm.
The other ship grew large on the view screen as they closed in. and several dozen fighters flitted out into the shrinking gap between them.
"Emergency response crews report ready,"
said Yarbrough, looking up from his station. Proctor nodded.
"Good. Let's get this show on the road. Ballsy?"
She leaned toward the comm speaker on her armrest.
Admiral?
"You have authorization to begin firing when they're in position. And remember, we only get one shot at this."
She glanced over at Commander Mumford at the science station.
"Status?"
The drilling beam has reached the core.
He shook his head.
Still not detecting any change on the ship's surface, and sensors still can't penetrate the hull.
Yarbrough stood up and paced nervously. Everyone was staring at the screen.
"It could be different this time. We only have one data point we're going off."
He had a point, Proctor thought. Still, it was their best bet. The last time that port opened, they'd been able to reach inside with their sensors, but only barely. And best better know they didn't have time to—
"Now!"
yelled Commander Mumford.
"A port is opening on the underside."
"Open fire!"
said Proctor. Through the deck plates, she could feel the stutter and pulse of the mag rail guns as they opened up a barrage of high-velocity slugs at the alien ship.
"Concentrate on one location,"
she said, indicating one section of the ship on her tactical readout and sending the coordinates over to the tactical crew.
"See if you can't punch through in one spot. Didn't work last time, but you never know."
"All fighters are engaging the hatch,"
said Ballsy through the comm.
"They have opened fire. No opening mechanisms in sight, but we're raining hell on it all the same."
"Good. No return fire yet?"
She turned to Lieutenant Whitehorse at Tactical and her crew. The sensor officer shook her head.
"No, ma'am."
Proctor turned back to the view screen.
"Oh, that's damned peculiar.
They're still drilling into the planet. Mumford, I thought you said it had reached the core." "It has."
Mumford scratched his head.
"They've decreased the intensity of the beam down to less than 1% power. I should amend my previous statement. They've reached the core. But the pressures down there are so intense that most of the hole immediately fills with liquid nickel iron from the outer core."
"So what's the beam doing right now?"
Mumford shook his head.
"Maybe just maintaining part of the hole open until it can launch its doohickey? No sign of that either, though."
"But the port on the ship is still open? Maybe the fighters are having an effect. Ballsy?"
Proctor gripped the chair and leaned towards the comm.
Ballsy's booming voice filled the room. "We're spraying that hole with everything we've got, Shelby. Whatever armor they've got, it's damn thick, and probably juiced up with something like the old smart steel armor our ships used to have back in the day. But, you know, 1,000,000,000 times stronger, since we can't seem to make a dent in this thing."
She nodded and watched the Golgothic's purple-white beam as it started flickering, puttering towards the end of its life.
"Whatever you're doing, it looks like it might be working. The beam is shutting down, and the ship hasn't launched its cargo yet like last time at Ido."
She turned to Tactical.
"Are the mag rails having any effect?"
Whitehorse shook her head.
"Minimal. We're hitting the same spot we were with the whole fleet last time. Finally gouging out a decent-sized hole, but that armor is formidable."
Proctor stroked her chin.
"At least we've shown it's mortal."
She eyed the alien ship on the screen as its beam ramped down, pulsing, flickering.
"This is unnerving. Why isn't it fighting back like last time?"
Commander Yarbrough studied his data readout.
"It could be that it no longer even views us as a threat. When a few ants attack the treads of your boot, do you stop what you're doing to stomp on them?"
"Depends on the ant," she murmured, trying to put the pieces together. Something was off. She turned back to Mumford.
"Are we getting what we came for?"
"Making progress, but I'm still running into heavy interference just inside that hatch. It would sure help if—"
"Captain, something's coming out."
Whitehorse pointed up at the screen. Sure enough, the same small metallic sphere emerged from the ship's hatch, and in a flicker of near-instantaneous acceleration, launched itself down to the surface, following the remains of the purple-white beam, which was still flickering and pulsing as it decayed.
"Ballsy, target that thing and destroy it,"
she said into the comm. On the view screen, they all watched as several of the fighters looped around the ship and shot down towards the metallic sphere as it sped towards the hole on the planet's surface. One of the fighters exploded.
"The ship is firing!"
yelled Whitehorse even as they watched a second fighter explode.
"Tactical, take that thing out,"
Proctor said, standing up suddenly.
"All available mag rails, fire!"
Whitehorse shook her head.
It's moving too fast for the Magrail targeting computers.
Another fighter exploded as the Golgothic ship launched a massive railgun slug of its own. There were 3 fighters left trailing the sphere, unloading their guns into it to no avail. Proctor shook her head.
Call them off, Ballsy.
The 3 fighters pulled off. Only a few dozen kilometers remained between the sphere and the hole, and the distance shrunk quickly. Before long, the sphere plunged into the fiery storm of lava rain that was erupting from the hole and completely disappeared from view.
It's moving,
said Whitehorse. They all watched as the Golgothic started pulling away, the beam now completely shut off.
The hatch is closing.
Proctor paced back to the science station.
Commander, what's the word? Did we get anything?
Mumford shook his head slowly.
I'll need more time to break through that interference.
How much time?
He shrugged.
5 minutes? Maybe. This thing is like nothing I've ever seen. It's almost like a meta-space shielding going on in there, since I can't even probe it with virtual particle scans.
Ensign Risa,
she called down to the lower bridge.
Flank it. Get in its way. Match its course if it turns. If it wants to leave, it's got to go through us.
The general murmur of battle operations on the bridge fell quieter, as they all understood the implications of that order.
Aye, aye, Admiral.
Yarborough came up behind her and murmured in her ear,
This had better be worth it. We're sacrificing a lot just for some data.
Proctor nodded.
Without data, we're shooting blanks, Commander.
The Independence darted forward into the path of the alien ship. Proctor could feel the strain of the inertial canceller's pulse against the deck plates.
Is it slowing?
Risa shook her head.
No, ma'am.
3 kilometers, said Whitehorse. Proctor had returned to stand behind her chair and gripped the headrest tightly.
2 kilometers.
Whitehorse was shaking her head.
Still not slowing down.
She looked up, her face ashen white.
1 kilometer.
Something darted out from the bottom of the view screen towards the alien ship, moving fast. A shuttle. Proctor's grip on the headrest tightened.
Who the hell is that?
Chapter 41. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, Elamine. Fighter Bay, ISS Independence. Civic had no sooner touched the shuttle down onto the deck plate of the fighter bay when the 3 students ripped their seat restraints away and raced towards the exit hatch. All 3 of them were covered in vomit. One of them had a wet crotch. Civic rolled his eyes, but part of him couldn't blame the kid. He'd put them through the ringer with those maneuvers. It was like nothing he'd ever done before, not even since. As soon as the memory surfaced, he shoved it aside. Seeing his father had finally brought it to the surface, and he'd been working hard to suppress it, but now was not the time. There were bigger fish to fry. He followed them out the hatch and bounded down the ramp. A deckhand was already examining the exterior of the ship. The nameplate, with the word Fenway printed on it, had nearly half melted off. "She gonna live?" asked Civic. The deckhand shrugged, his floppy blonde hair swishing as he shook his head.
I suppose it was either her skin or yours, sir.
Not knowing where to go, the 3 students had grouped up at the bottom of the ramp, so Civic pointed to the exit. "Your people are assembling in the flight deck mess hall. Out the door to the right, you can't miss it. There are bathrooms down there so you can... clean up." His eyes darted down towards their stained clothing. One of the kids, Four Eyes, the one who'd been cowering in the corner, looked like he was finally coming out of his daze.
Did anyone get Chen?
Civic paused. "I'm sorry, who?"
He was injured, I think. It's hard to remember, but I remember him hitting his head, and he fell. I remember blood, but I was too freaked out at the time to check on him.
The other kid. The one lying on the floor in his own blood. His pulse had been undetectable, though in the heat of the escape, Civic wasn't 100% sure he'd been dead. 99% sure, but... Do you have saved him too? Civic shook his head, but he couldn't bring himself to say the words, "He's dead, kid." "Let's just go to the mess hall, get you guys cleaned up." He ushered them to the door and pointed down the hall. When they'd gone, he glanced up at the window to the CIC. He'd be up there. Civic half wanted to just go back to his cell, go lay down, commiserate with Sarah, who he supposed was still locked up in a cell of her own. But he climbed the stairs. "What's the situation?" Vols glanced up, a shadow of a scowl clouding his face. "Nice flying." "Thanks." Vols turned back to the situational screen. "Just figuring out how to get this hatch on the mystery ship to stay open." Civic followed his father's eyes to the video feed, where he watched the alien ship start to move. Through the comm, Admiral Proctor's voice boomed. "Ballsy, target that thing and destroy it!" Vols tapped the comm open to the group of fighters closest to the alien ship. "Raptor Squad, pursue and engage the hatch. Unload everything you have. We've got to keep that thing open." The 6 fighters of the Raptor Squad looped around the alien ship and darted down underneath it, positioning themselves for shots at the hatch. "Can't you target its opening mechanisms?" Vols didn't even look at him. "Thanks, Sherlock. Already tried it." "Can't we?" Vols's head snapped towards him. "Get the hell out. Kinda busy here." His thumb jabbed towards the door. On the tactical screen, one of the glowing icons indicating the fighters blipped out. The other screen confirmed it. A brief fireball marked where one of the fighters had been. One of the assistant CAGs swore, "Cliffhanger's gone." Another icon blipped out. Another fireball. "And high side, too." Civic shook his head and left. He took the stairs 3 at a time and landed painfully on the flight deck. Before he could even see what the deckhand was doing, he was already flying up the ramp to the shuttle Fenway. He paused to yell down at him, "Detach that fueling line or there's going to be some serious whiplash." To his credit, the deckhand took it in stride, dropped what he was doing with some cylinders in the corner and rushed to snap the fuel line off the shuttle. His blonde hair flopping almost like a breeze was blowing it. "Good to go, sir." Moments later, the shuttle was arcing quickly out the bay doors, passing the atmospheric containment field. He clicked over to autopilot and set a destination: the alien ship. With the shuttle flying itself, he sprung over to the flight suit locker near the hatch. "Please don't be empty," he thought. It wasn't. He pulled the suit on without removing his vomit-stained clothes and jammed the helmet into place. The seals engaged. He'd no sooner sat back down at the controls when the comm erupted in an explosion of yelling and cursing. "Ethan, get your ass back here, now!" His father did not sound pleased. Rather than waste time on a response, he angled the shuttle straight towards the hatch. The autopilot had gotten him close, but of course it had maintained a safe following distance. Safety was the last thing on his mind. The hatch was closing, and he doubted his effort would make a difference, but according to Pops and Admiral Proctor, that hatch had to stay open, so he'd keep it open, damn it. The distance closed rapidly, and at the last second he applied lateral thrust, rotating the shuttle such that the hatch was pointing away from the alien ship. The collision threw him out of his chair. He'd forgotten to secure the seat restraint. He flew out sideways and into the wall. A pop told him his shoulder dislocated, but the pain was absent, replaced by an adrenaline-fueled sense of "get the hell out." One glance out the front viewport told him he'd succeeded. The shuttle was firmly wedged into the alien ship's hatch, whose door was now grinding down on the hull. If he was going to get out, now was the time. He punched the opening mechanism on the shuttle's hatch with his good arm. It started to open, but ground to a halt, jammed. "Oh, shit," he murmured. A quick glance out the hatch's tiny window told him there was no chance it would open any further. The roof of the shuttle buckled as the alien ship's hatch door closed down upon it, clenching the shuttle like a powerful jaw. All the air was evacuated by that point, but he could almost imagine the shrieking, twisting steel of the shuttle protest the crushing force. "Think, Civic, think," he murmured to himself, scanning the inside of the shuttle for something, anything that would help him get out. He opened the armory locker. Empty. Of course, he thought wryly. It don't rain, but it shitstorms. That's what Sarah would have said. What would Sarah do? She seemed to have an uncanny knack for surviving during the 2 days that he'd gotten to know her. An image of her popped into his mind, standing above him in the bay of the Miguel Urquiza, brandishing the plasma welding torch she'd used to knock the Bolivaran intelligence officer cold.
Plasma welder.
He yanked the utility locker open, and sure enough, there it was, right where she'd left it. He primed it and cranked it on, crying out when the bright spot of plasma seared itself into his vision. His helmet should have automatically darkened, but it seemed to be malfunctioning. He felt the steel of the shuttle grind and shriek through his feet. His malfunctioning helmet was the least of his worries. Luckily, the welder was rated at vacuum. The sharp plasma flame was bright despite the lack of air in the compartment. He brought it to bear on the bottom edge of the hatch, where there was the most space already open to the outside.
Please cut, please cut, please cut, please cut.
The thing was a welder, not a cutter.
Is that a thing?
He didn't have time to think about it. He cranked the power up to maximum and, with a thrill of relief, sliced clean through the metal like it was butter. Very hard, cold butter. It was slow work, but a minute later he pulled the plasma torch away, anchored himself against the opposing wall, and kicked the section of the hatch away with a grunt. It flew out into space. He grabbed the edges of the hole he'd cut, his dislocated shoulder burning with fiery pain, and moments later he was sailing through the vacuum, tumbling end over end from the slight torque he'd applied to himself as he'd left the shuttle. Each time he spun around, he saw the alien ship brooding large above him, with its hatch now jammed half open. He heard a hiss. An alarm sounded in his helmet. The heads-up display showed the oxygen status of the suit. The pressure was dropping. Fast. But he'd done it. He watched the alien ship's hatch reopen, then close, catching again on the shuttle. "Suck it, bitch," he said, before passing out. Chapter 42. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, El Amin. Bridge, ISS Independence. Proctor watched in disbelief as the shuttle banked hard and careened sideways into the alien ship's hatch. She slapped the comm. "Ballsy, who the hell is that?" The comm microphone picked up his sigh.
Who the hell do you think? Admiral,
began Commander Mumford.
I'm nearly there. The metaspace shielding has a modulation pattern that... Well, long story short, just a few more minutes and sensors will be able to penetrate.
Lieutenant Whitehorse pointed up at the view screen.
It stopped.
Proctor looked up and confirmed. The Golgothics had indeed stopped accelerating away.
"Should we fire, Admiral? They might be vulnerable."
They could finally be gaining the upper hand against this thing. She shifted from one foot to the other, about to give the confirmation to fire. A flash on the screen caught her eye.
"What is that?"
They all stared at the screen at the alien ship. The camera zoomed in on the hatch as Lieutenant Whitehorse adjusted the image. A bright flickering light was pulsing through the metal of the shuttle's hatch.
"It's cutting through,"
she murmured to herself. She pointed back at Whitehorse.
"Hold fire."
They all watched with bated breath as the flickering light moved in a wide arc around the bottom part of the shuttle's hatch. The Golgothic vessel appeared to be trying to disgorge the shuttle, its own hatch door opening, then shutting against the shuttle repeatedly. Several pieces of the shuttle's exterior instrumentation flew out as debris. An idea struck her. She paced over to the comm station.
"Lieutenant QWERTY, can you tap into the shuttle's systems?"
A nod.
Yes'm,
he drawled.
"Lieutenant Whitehorse, is the shuttle's reactor still active?"
she said, watching as QWERTY established a link to the shuttle's computer. A moment later she replied,
"Yes, Admiral, it is."
Whitehorse cocked her head.
"Are you going to—"
"Of course I am. QWERTY." She leaned down to peer at the lieutenant's work. He nodded.
"I'm in control of the shuttle systems. I assume you're going to order a cascade failure of the drive?"
"Please," she said.
"One quantum cascade failure coming right up. Might take a moment. They build these things to not overload, you know."
They all watched the screen. It seemed they all knew without speaking that if the pilot was going to escape, it had to be now.
"I'm ready, ma'am,"
said QWERTY. Proctor nodded.
"Mumford?"
The science chief was tapping his foot nervously.
"I think I've got it. Sensors piercing up into the ship now. Trying to interpret."
"Scan now, interpret later. Get all the data you can."
A flash on the screen, and a tenth of a second later the deck plate under her feet rumbled.
"It's firing,"
yelled Whitehorse. Commander Yarbrough called out from the XO station.
"It punched a hole down on decks 7 through 10. Clean through the hull.
He pointed nervously up at the screen.
Admiral, it's now or never.
She swore and cast a glance at Mumford.
Commander?
He shook his head.
Scanning. We could use another few minutes for a more complete...
We don't have a few minutes, Admiral,
yelled Yarbrough. The deck rumbled again with another impact of the alien ship's devastating railgun slug, and again a third time. The fourth struck much closer, and the lights momentarily went out. She studied the view screen, finally seeing a telltale movement close to the Golgothics.
Lieutenant, is that what I think it is?
Whitehorse furrowed her brow, studying her sensor display.
It's Civic.
The camera zoomed in even further and showed the pilot tumbling end over end, away from the hole he'd cut in the shuttle door.
Admiral,
said Yarbrough impatiently,
we've got 11 dead on Deck 7 alone. How much longer are we going to wait?
She grit her teeth as she watched Civic tumble away. It was still too close to the shuttle, and a core explosion would mean instant death for him at that distance.
Almost, she murmured.
The deck rumbled again and again.
2 more impacts, Deck 15, Sections 1 and 4,
said Yarbrough. He shook his head.
Complete decompression. At least 5 dead.
She turned to Mumford, eyeing him questioningly. He shrugged.
The more time, the better on this sensor feed. But we've already gotten quite a package of data.
Fine. It was time.
Lieutenant Querty, initiate feedback.
Civic continued his slow tumble, now nearly a kilometer away. It would have to do. A moment later, the screen oversaturated with the piercing light of the shuttle's explosion. When the screen cleared, Proctor gasped.
Was it that easy?
She murmured. The alien ship was gone. Chapter 43. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, Elamine. Captain's Ready Room, ISS Independence. An hour later, confident that Commander Yarbrough had a handle on the recovery and repair operations, Proctor took a moment to retreat to the Ready Room. Just to breathe. The door slid shut behind her, and all she could think about was the epithet, Mother Killer. Years ago, just before the final battle of the Second Swarm War, she'd earned that title. She'd killed a Sciora matriarch by whacking her head with a steel pipe. She'd only meant to incapacitate the alien, but Sciora physiology was still unknown to her, and the impact resulted in the matriarch's death. And with her over 50,000 embryo Sciora, who, as far as she understood, were all completely developed individuals living inside the matriarch, just waiting for their bodies. Most never live long enough to get a body. In the case of the matriarch Proctor killed, none of them did. 50,000 dead, with one blow from Proctor. Such a small, insignificant action that had unthinkable consequences. They'd won the war. The swarm was destroyed, and the Sciora liberated from the swarm's influence. Not to mention humanity saved. The upper Sciora leadership officially forgave her for her actions, but the anger simmered under the surface. And in the few dealings she'd had with the Sciora since then, the name followed her. Mother Killer. She felt it even more acutely now, in the aftermath of the battle with the Golgothics, and she collapsed on the couch by the wall. In the final analysis, 42 crew members had died that day. 8 of them, while she was waiting for Civic to float far enough away from the shuttle to survive the explosion. Waiting for Mumford to take his data. 8. Including Ensign Flay. Pregnant Ensign Flay. Mother Killer. The door chimed. She didn't answer. It opened anyway, and Captain Valls stepped through. "Halsey," she whispered, not even moving from her prone position. He sat down next to her, still silent. "I messed up. It's all my fault." A moment's silence. "That doesn't sound like the Shelby I know." She stared at him. She wanted to glare, but didn't even have that in her. All she wanted to do was escape, disappear, run from the ever-growing pile of bodies left in her wake. How could I keep going? Keep doing this? Letting people die, making
People die through my actions. Or inactions. If I breathe, someone dies. If I give a command, someone dies. If I don't give a command, someone dies. I just can't. Not anymore. Not again. It's all my fault.
Bullshit, he said. She sat up and faced him, hoping against hope that the tear on her cheek was just sweat. It was not a crier.
I killed 8 people today, Ballsy.
And you saved my son, he said, his lips tightening. For as much as I hate the bastard, I'm glad he's alive. Thank you, Shelby.
But I killed 8 people doing it, she said.
A pit had formed in her stomach, the same pit she'd felt decades ago when she'd realized what she'd done to the Sciora. Again, if you'll permit me to repeat myself. He leaned in close to her, face to face. Bullshit. She pushed him away.
Just stop. Let me wallow in self-pity in peace. It's part of the magic of command, you know. I've got to be the Iron Lady out there, but I pay for it every now and then in here with a good pansy-ass cry.
He chuckled, grimly. Shelby, do I need to say it? Again? Bullshit. Seriously, you're what, 70 years old? You've commanded more ships and men and women into battle than any officer alive. You, of all people, should know that you don't bear responsibility for those deaths.
Of course I do.
She swiveled on the couch to face him.
Of course I do. I'm the commanding officer of this ship, and anyone that dies here is my responsibility.
He waved a hand, as if batting aside her argument. Yeah, whatever. Shelby, we both know that the responsibility for those deaths lies in one place and only one place. He pointed over to the bulkhead. That ship, those aliens, the Golgothics or whatever we're calling them, they're responsible for those deaths, no one else. You're responsible for the rest of us being alive, never forget that. She wiped her eye with a sleeve.
Ballsy, Look. You remember the Sciora? My history with them? Mother killer? It just all came back to me today. Between getting shot at down there on San Martin, then leading us through that battle and making decisions that led to deaths after over a decade of not having to make a decision more monumental than where to go out to lunch, it's just a little jarring. Plus Ensign Flay.
He nodded. Yeah, I heard. That's why I'm here, because I knew you'd take that hard. A long silence. She turned away and leaned back to the wall behind the couch.
You know, I miscarried once.
She watched his face, studying his reaction. He flinched slightly. There was something there. I'm sorry. I didn't know, he said. When was that?
Oh, long time ago. I was like 20. Had a fling with a guy. He was fantastic, but lied about his protection. Before I knew it, I was 2 months along, and, well, I was 2 years into my first science degree.
He snorted, then flushed. Sorry. Bad time to call you a nerd? She shook her head in mock disgust. Ballsy was always ballsy.
2 years along. And I decided I'd keep it, of course. And then, a month later, he was gone.
At that moment, she realized she'd never even told anyone besides her brother and his wife, never mind revealing the sex. I'm sorry, he repeated. I know it must be hard for you, with Ensign Flay. I've lost people too, Shelby. Lots of people, hundreds. It never got easy. Even when it seemed routine, it was never easy. You know this better than anyone alive. I just got numb to it. Like a strange combination of searing pain and guilt every time it happened, and a dull numbness at the ghoulish routine of it all. She nodded in agreement.
You paused there. A moment ago, when I mentioned the miscarriage.
She phrased it as a statement, but the question was implied. He shook his head.
Not my place to say. I'll let her tell you if she wants to.
Who?
He shook his head. Not my place. But I'll say this. Ethan was grounded from flying for very good reason. He was reckless. Unbelievably reckless, like he was trying to one-up me and his mom.
Space champ? She said,
remembering the pilot from the ISS Warrior. Yeah. I mean, Ethan and I had a huge falling out after the divorce. Accused me of... Well, it doesn't matter. He was only 15. His mom married a guy right away. Civic. And Ethan changed his last name just to spite me. He was young, and I was...
You? It were you?
Yeah.
He breathed deep.
Anyway, he had this chip on his shoulder. Had something to prove, you know? Parents were two of the most legendary fighter pilots of the war. He had to be his own man, be better than us. So he was... reckless. Around the time of the accident, he'd hitched up with Jerusha.
Hitched up? I didn't know they were that serious.
He chuckled. Yeah, at the time, neither did I. Anyway, they were an item. Had plans to get married, start a family. She was going to retire early, and he was going to keep flying, and... well, then the accident.
Tell me about it. All of it. I only heard snippets and rumors. I was Fleet Admiral at the time, but stuff like that didn't always trickle up to me. I only read the final report.
He shrugged. Nothing much to tell, really, beyond what was probably in that report. He was flying his mom and stepdad around in a shuttle over France during leave, and he was trying to impress them and crashed. Like I said, reckless. He was a wreck, so was I. We fought more. At the funeral, no less, your stereotypical family brawl right over the grave.
Oh, she said.
Yeah.
He nodded.
And things got really rough between him and Jerusha. Really rough. She was a wreck, and she... well... between the trauma and the fighting and the grief...
Oh my God, she said, putting two and two together. She was pregnant.
You didn't hear it from me, not my place. But I just tell you all this so you know the history there before you decide to put Ethan back into the cockpit of another bird. Before you decide to put more lives in his hands.
She held her head in her own hands. But after a moment, she stood up and unsecured 2 cups from the cupboard. He was amazing today, Ballsy. He may have single-handedly destroyed that ship, helped us extract vital intel from the inside of it by giving us enough time to complete the scan. You know, in case they come back in greater numbers, I'd sure as hell like to be prepared. He nodded.
And he saved those 3 kids from the research station.
She poured tea into the 2 cups and handed one to him. That too. All the more reason that we need to consider using him again, assuming this situation isn't over yet. If these aliens come back, I want all the weapons and tools at my disposal that we have, and your son is one of them. The door chimed and Proctor waved the door open. Lieutenant QWERTY took a step inside.
My metaspace message from Admiral Mullins at CENTCOM Bolivar. He's demanding you deliver Lieutenant Civic to his custody immediately. And the shuttle that he stole, Fenway. And the mechanic that came with him, Sarah Batak.
Proctor raised an eyebrow. Speak of the devil. She turned to Ballsy. Has Ethan said anything about what happened back at Watchdog?
He shrugged. I haven't had time to talk to him yet. He's still in sickbay. Got a bad radiation dose from that explosion.
She stood back up, setting her tea aside. Thank you, Commander. Please tell Admiral Mullins that we'll be there as soon as the situation permits. Dismissed.
QWERTY retreated and the door closed. Ballsy stood up and handed the empty cup back to her. Sounds like we need to have a long heart-to-heart with my son.
She nodded and walked to the door. Yes, but not yet. I think it's time we go talk to his companion. Chapter 44. Irigoyen Sector, Bolivar System, Bolivar. CENTCOM Bolivar, Command Center. Admiral Mullins?
The aide poked his head into the office and Mullins waved him in.
Any word?
A curt nod. The lieutenant handed him a datapad.
The Independence is damaged from its engagement with the Golgothics, sir. They're going to continue repair operations and get to us when they can.
And they confirmed they have Zivik and the mechanic in their custody?
He leaned forward in his seat, studying the message from the Independence's comm officer.
Yes, sir.
Mullins scanned through the data file on the Independence, her status, damage from the battle. Everything that the comm officer had attached to the metaspace message he'd sent in reply to Mullins's own. Something popped out at him. A name in the list of officers. Vols, Commander Air Group. Mullins stood up abruptly.
Alert the captains. We need to accelerate the schedule.
Sir.
Mullins urgently paced out into the hallway and back to the operations center.
You heard me.
Aye, sir, but shouldn't we wait until... Mullins cut him off with a brisk shake of his head.
No. No time. There's something we all missed.
What? The door to the operations center slid open at the last second.
That Lieutenant Civik's old man is on the Independence. We can't afford a lapse of operational security right now. Tell the captains.
The aide nodded and saluted.
Aye, sir.
He turned away to go to the comm center.
And Lieutenant.
Yes, sir.
Mullins dropped his voice.
I don't need to remind you to keep this off any channel that Curiel can monitor.
The aide nodded.
Of course, sir. Non-IDF channels are harder to encrypt, but we have a workaround.
Good. Dismissed.
Chapter 45. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, El Amin. Brig, ISS Independence.
They don't make brigs like they used to,
thought Proctor. The shiny plastic door slid open to reveal the cell beyond, whose walls were made of the same smooth material, looking more like a sterile plastic psych ward room than a jail cell. She supposed the flimsiness of it was a purposeful deception. The door could probably withstand several RPG blasts and a plasma torch. Lure would-be escapees into revealing their hand, only to be stopped by progress in material science. The irreverent slogan of her favorite college professor rang in her ears. Science, bitches.
Sarah Batak,
said Proctor, stepping into the cell. Captain Vols followed.
Ma'am,
protested the Marine on duty. It's against regulation for flag officers to go into detainees' cells without... She spun around to face him and held up a hand to quiet him.
That will be all, Corporal. Dismissed. Please guard the doors and see that we're not disturbed.
Chagrined, the Marine took a step back and looked from Batak to Proctor to Vols. Apparently deciding the mechanic didn't pose a threat to either of them, he saluted and retreated past the doors to the brig and shut them inside. She turned back to Batak.
You were on Watchdog Station when it blew?
The mechanic nodded.
Going through your records, it appears you're an employee of something called Snell Staffing Corporation. I presume you've been contracted out to one of the major defense conglomerates? That's right.
Batak nodded.
Snell hired us out to Shovik Orion as temp workers about a year ago. I figure Shovik Orion don't want to pay benefits, so they rely on places like Snell to get them through the loopholes.
Is that legal?
Ballsy turned to Proctor.
Can they do that?
Proctor nodded. Unfortunately, during her stint as Fleet Admiral, she'd witnessed the grift, waste, fraud, and abuse firsthand. But as the corporations were private entities and she was military, her hands were tied. She could steer contracts to the certain reputable contractors, but in her opinion, it was always simply to the least bad of all the available options. She continued.
And when the alien ship arrived at Bolivar, what happened? I know the official report, but I want your perspective. What was going on the station?
Batak shrugged.
Look, Admiral, I'd love to talk, but seeing how I'm in a jail cell, I think it might be best to have a lawyer around.
She folded her arms. She was done talking already, and Proctor could tell by the defiant look on her face that she meant it.
Look, Ms. Batak, you're in this cell now for two reasons. One is that this is a military vessel at red alert in wartime. We don't have room for civilians, and this just happens to be the easiest non-classified area to keep you in. 2. Someone well-placed wants you back at Bolivar. Very badly. Enough that one of my admirals asked for you by name.
She supposed a white lie was permissible, given the circumstances. Mullins hadn't, in fact, used her name, but he didn't have to. The fact that he was demanding her return and civics was just a little off. Normal procedure would have been to drop them off at the nearest IDF CENTCOM base, which in this case would be with Admiral Tigre right here in the San Martin system, not all the way back at Bolivar. Batak smirked.
Good reason for me to keep my damn mouth shut then, ma'am.
The lopsided smile disappeared, replaced by ice.
I'd like a lawyer, please.
Ballsy leaned in to whisper in Proctor's ear, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. Let's go talk to Ethan. Doc will revive him if I ask.
Batak cocked her head at him, a look of recognition spreading over her face.
At least it looked like recognition. Proctor wondered where Batak would recognize him from, though there was that whole celebrity thing from being a hero of the Swarm War. For that matter, why didn't Proctor warrant the same look of recognition? She was the companion of the hero of Earth, after all. Proctor laughed inwardly. At least the girl wasn't a Grangerite. Her attitude would have been much more deferential if she had been.
You're him, aren't you?
Said the mechanic.
You're his dad. Civics.
Ballsy eyed her. I am. Why, has he talked about me? She nodded.
Yeah. Quite a bit, actually.
Proctor's heart sank. Any chance that the girl might talk seemed to have left the room and get torpedoed by one of the alien ship's super railgun slugs. Ballsy stayed quiet, as if hoping she'd continue, unprompted. Luckily, she did.
He said you two had a major falling out. Detests you, actually, that much was clear.
Well, let's just say we've had our issues, Ballsy said, his lips tight. Batak regarded him as if weighing her choices.
He also said that he could trust you. That's why we're here. He was looking for you. Said you were the only one he trusted to tell it to. He was desperate to get you some information.
Proctor's ears perked up.
Information.
Batak sighed as if she were committing to an action she wasn't sure about, but was going to do nonetheless. Consequences and regrets be damned.
Okay, I'll tell you what I know. What we came here to tell you,
she said, looking straight at Ballsy.
Ethan said he could trust you, so I'll trust you. I just hope that after all is said and done, I can go home. You know, alive and all.
Proctor turned back to fully face the girl. Girl, she thought. She kept on thinking about the mechanic as a girl when she must have been at least 25 or so.
Have I gotten that old? Sarah, I promise, I'll do everything in my power to protect you. But the truth is, something is going on. Something deeper than just a deadly alien invasion, and heaven help us, that's bad enough. But between Sangre de Cristo, the multiple attempts on my life, my missing nephew, a simmering resistance movement that seems like it's about to break out into open revolt and revolution, and a host of other details that I don't have time to go into right now, I think we're looking at something far bigger, far deeper than that. I'll be honest. We need you.
She breathed. Why the hell was she opening up to a mechanic? Oh well. She supposed it might make the girl feel more inclined to hold nothing back. Good psych-op, Shelby. She could hear Granger telling her.
Okay.
Batak nodded.
Everything. Look, Ethan and I have been thinking the same thing. There's something big going on.
She proceeded to lay it all out. From when she'd been assigned to Watchdog Station and started seeing odd, sudden changes in personnel, to the alien-induced hysteria when the mystery ship attacked, to the assassination of the Shovik Orion contractor Jerry Underwood that Ethan witnessed, their subsequent escape from both Watchdog Station and the Miguel Urquiza, then from San Martin, and their theories about Shovik Orion and the GPC being in bed together, and the Metaspace Echo on board their shuttle.
Excuse me, did you say Metaspace Echo?
Said Proctor. Before she knew it, she was on her feet, though she didn't quite understand why.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's the best way I could describe it. I'm no scientist, just a grunt mechanic, ma'am. But those readings, It was like the ghost of a metaspace reading coming in and out, almost circular around a point in that shuttle. I mean, I know that's crazy. There's no such thing as a circular metaspace signal, but... Holy shit, breathed Proctor. She turned to Vols. Volsey, we've got to talk. Excuse us, please, Sarah.
Batak stood up too, looking quite angry.
Wait, I tell you all that, and you just leave to go...
Proctor touched her shoulder.
We'll get you some quarters, and I'll have guards posted. Discreetly, she added, noting the sudden look of panic on the girl's face. They'll keep you safe, but I need to go. You've reminded me of something critically important.
She motioned them all to the door.
Come on.
Before they even approached the door to the brig, the comm crackled to life.
Admiral Proctor?
It was Commander Yarbrough.
Yes, Commander. Sir, we have a situation here. I'll be right there.
She pointed them all through the door and glanced at Ballsy. She thumbed towards Batak, indicating he arrange accommodations and guard for her.
What's the situation, Commander? We've been holding station in orbit around Elamine as ordered, ma'am. Except we have a guest. A very large guest.
Proctor's blood ran cold.
That metaspace ghost of a signal on that shuttle couldn't have. No, it couldn't have. The swarm couldn't be back. They couldn't. They were dead. She killed their last ship years ago.
She cleared her throat.
Swarm? No, ma'am. Skiora. One of their 6 main generation ships, and their leader is asking for you. By name.
Chapter 46. Irigoyen Sector, San Martin System, Elamine. Bridge, ISS Independence. Proctor wasn't sure what she'd find on the bridge. Would the appearance of a 100-kilometer-long alien generation ship provoke an eerie calm among her bridge crew? Or would they be running around with their heads cut off at the sight of a ship that could destroy the Independence 1,000 times over? The massive ship packed a punch greater than 100 of the old swarm carriers, using the same antimatter beam turrets as their old enemy. A weapon so powerful it could slice through even the old Legacy Fleet carriers like the Constitution and the Warrior. And for that matter, the Chesapeake. The thought of Captain Diaz's boat, her old boat, the last of the Legacy Fleet, succumbing to the mysterious alien ship just a few days ago filled her with... What was that feeling? Anger? Sadness? As angry as she was, it sure felt a lot more like mourning. Nostalgia, more like it. It was like the end of an era had come. The Legacy Fleet was no more. A simpler time had passed. Straightforward enemies of old had been replaced with mysterious shadows that threatened to destroy them all from within.
You're being melodramatic, Shelby.
She smiled. Maybe so. But all the same, what she wouldn't give to have Granger, Prucha, Diaz, and Space Champ back. And the Warrior, and Chesapeake. All the old crew, her friends, her family. Too many had passed on. And in the meantime, it seemed their problems only multiplied and grew more complex. The bridge doors opened, and to their credit, the bridge crew was calm and confident, working steadily, even as the unimaginably massive Skiora vessel filled the screen. A super dreadnought. That's what they called them back in the closing days of the Swarm War. It stretched off into the distance, its surface details getting lost in the blackness of space. The light from San Martin's sun was too weak at this distance to illuminate it further.
Status.
Proctor approached her chair but didn't sit down. Rather, she stood behind and gripped the headrest. It seemed to be her preferred position these days. Face down.